Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. All right, what's
So,
up?
not much. I just thought maybe you'd want to talk about these riots a little. For those, probably most of your audience doesn't remember, we had a discussion on the impeachment back in the day, and I thought it was a good discussion and thought maybe we'd have some disagreements. It'd be worth a discussion.
Sure.
So, yeah, my take is that I feel that until we get to the root of what the cause of these riots are, that we'll just see them spring up over and over again. Oh, by the way, I should ask you, I'm so sorry. You don't mind if I record this?
Yeah, yeah, no, I guess about, yeah, do whatever.
Okay. But I think we need to address the root cause of this, and I think a lot of it has to do with the intentional flaming of racial rhetoric and subjectively putting selective stories out that kind of inflames this. And what that does is it allows the Black community to be co-opted by people in positions of power that want to sort of use them as pawns, and it makes things like these riots inevitable.
Okay, so is this, by extension then, do you think that the Black community has no legitimate grievances with the police then, or?
Oh, no. I think there's certainly legitimate grievances with the police, but I believe that the majority of the grievances with the police are that there is police brutality that's kind of indicative of the police regardless of your race. And so oftentimes what we see is, I'm not saying there can't be a situation where we see one of these deaths that is the legitimate murdering of a Black person based on racism, but most of the time we don't see any proof of that. And there's not really a good faith effort given by people in position of power to find out if racism was the motivation. So they selectively push stories, sometimes which were wrong, such as the hands up, don't shoot. And if I was a member of a community that was constantly told, look, the police in this country are hunting people that look like me just because they don't like people that look like me, I would definitely have legitimate grievances. But I think the fact that you can see even at these riots, you see often, even if I don't necessarily agree with the narrative behind the protests, I totally support all of these protesters. You can see Black protesters telling these outside agitators, like, get out of here. This is our neighborhood that you're burning down and making a violent riot. And I think the same thing's happening at the narrative level.
Well, so to be clear, those people are just upset because they don't want any violence or destruction of their own, like, neighborhood stuff. They're not against, like, rioting against, like, police officers, or it's not because they think that, like, police officers are largely innocent when it comes to racial biases, right? They just don't want people destroying their own neighborhoods.
Well, right, but just real quick, I don't think they want people destroying any neighborhood. But I certainly agree with that. I don't think they're like, it's okay to go riot in a different neighborhood. I think most of these protesters legitimately want peaceful protest everywhere. It's not just, oh, I don't want the riot in my neighborhood. I think they legitimately would be like, that doesn't mean go to the suburbs and riot either. But yeah, absolutely, they don't disagree with the idea that police are systemically racist. Of course, I agree with that.
Yeah, so I mean, like, that's the problem, is that even if we were to say that police weren't systemically racist, or even if we were to grant that, the idea that the criminal justice system as a whole seems to take, like, certain racial slants, and the idea that the police are, like, the front, like, most public-facing part of the criminal justice system would probably lead to a lot of people being outraged. You'd only need to couple that with a couple of extrajudicial killings of Black people that nobody seems to do anything about, or nobody seems to care much about in order to get people, like, incredibly fucking enraged, I would imagine.
But I don't think nobody cared. I think basically this united 95% of the country that the murderers that killed George Floyd should be convicted. And although it didn't happen immediately, their arrest, it was within a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, but I think it's more than that, too. It's the idea that, like, 3 cops just stood by and watched him kill him. Like...
Yeah, have you seen the footage of Tony Timpa's death in 2016?
No, what is that?
Tony Timpa was a white man who had schizophrenia. He called the police on himself. You could YouTube it. He called the police on himself. He was handcuffed by security guards before he got there. The police put their knee on the back of him, laugh about it for about 12 minutes, I think. They joke because he's going to a psych ward, so they're sitting there making about jokes. They actually joked that perhaps they killed him, and they did kill him. There were 4 cops of mixed race that were involved in that. No riots, no selective outrage, no Al Sharpton, no Colin Kaepernick, no Black Lives Matter. And the point is...
there wouldn't be Al Sharpton or Colin Kaepernick or Black Lives Matter because it sounds like the guy wasn't Black, right?
Right. But if your object's to erase police brutality and police getting away with crimes, why wouldn't you care about all?
Well, because their object isn't about police brutality or police getting away with crimes. Their object is the unfair treatment of African Americans at the hands of the judicial system, which oftentimes comes through police. It's not a protest of the, I mean, I'm sure most of these people also would protest the entire judicial system, or would like not be in favor of the way the entire judicial system is set up. But this is very specifically about how African Americans are treated in the U.S. judicial system. So of course they're going to focus on black cases.
But what's the proof that the unfair treatment is unfair? Or even a better question, what's the proof?
There have been like a number of studies like demonstrating that like black people are charged or sentenced for higher times for the same exact crimes committed, even with similar prior records. That black people are stopped more than white people in similar areas, despite like a disproportionate amount of the population, you know, being a certain race. Like I mean, like this is do you? I mean, I don't have this on hand, so I'd have to go look for it. Do you think that evidence is faked or?
No. I've seen that evidence. I've read it. I'm very familiar with it. But what's the proof that racism's the cause of that?
Well, we don't know if racism is the cause of it. That's the whole point of like structural or judicial, the whole point of like systemic or structural racism is the idea that you can have a racist system without any individual racist actors.
But that would still have to be structural racism. What's the proof that it's structural racism?
Well, because it doesn't take like, well, if it's not structural racism, that would mean that the majority or a large number of people in the judicial system are like white supremacists or white nationalists, which I don't think is true.
Right, but the problem is you're just looking at a data set, and that data proves the assumption. You're not looking at all the possible factors that could lead to that data. Right, so there could be other reasons, such as systemic poverty.
Unless they tell you they're racist.
Such as they live with systemic poverty in incredibly population-dense areas.
Yeah, but so poverty doesn't explain like the disproportionate sentencing of black people versus white people, even with similar priors. Like that.
Sure, I mean they can get less advocacy from hiring better lawyers.
I don't think that's even if that was the case. First of all, I don't think that's the case. But even if that was the case, how does that counter the grievances of black people that feel like they're getting fucked by the system?
Okay. Let's look at it this way. So if we could say, we look at the numbers, and I'm not going to hold you to that. I would trust whatever you say the numbers are.
Sure. I'm pretty sure that when people do these analyses, they hold for like like socioeconomic status. Like they hold for these things. Because obviously if you compare a bunch of rich white people and poor black people, you're always going to get a certain outcome. Like I'm pretty sure this is something that researchers look for when they analyze these data sets. But
well, let me just say this. I'm not going to have the exact numbers just like you, but see if this is a fair characterization. So if you look at things like, and I think I agree with you on this, black people are more likely to get pulled over. I think it's true. They're more likely to get arrested if they're pulled over. They're more likely to get longer sentences. And I also believe that they're less likely to like win appeals and stuff like that. That's basically what a lot of this information says. And I think it's in comparison to white people's what it's comparing. So it's something like, I don't know, 20% more likely to get all of those than white people. Would you agree that's at least a reasonable characterization? I'm not saying 20% is the exact number.
Yeah, what about it?
Okay, so here's the problem. So if we don't look at the underlying factors and we say, well, the mere fact that that's the way it is proves that there must be something about race in this. There's a group in this country, when we look at their counterpart, that all of those numbers are way superior to that they get screwed over way more by the police. And that's men compared to women. In all of those categories, men are treated by the judicial system 10 times worse than women. Not actually 10 times, but you know what I mean, a lot worse. And the disparity is more between the difference between blacks and whites. So why wouldn't there be a grievance culture of men saying this country's sexist, our law enforcement sexist?
Well, there are.
Where's
so I mean you have feminism that talks about patriarchy, that addresses the fact that men are treated unfairly in a lot of ways in society too, and then you've got like men's rights advocates, which also talk all the time about how like men are treated unfairly, especially like in family courts.
Right, but that's a far cry from the, you know, this being such a big issue. This is the premier issue in our country right now.
Well, sure, because like to deal with the men problem, that's like a far different one that runs way deeper, because that also has, you're taking into account like gender roles and stuff like that as well, which are way harder to disentangle. Like it's a lot easier to say like black people and white people should probably be treated similarly than it is like men and women should probably be treated similarly, because we can see like there probably shouldn't be very many differences in how we treat like black and white people, but men and women still have like pretty different roles in society across all sorts of like races and countries and everything. So like that's a lot harder of a one to deal with.
But I don't see how having a different role should mean that law enforcement should treat you far more negatively.
Well, I mean, it's going to overrepresent you for a lot of different things. So, for instance, if men are taught, or if it's generally more acceptable as a man to be more more like aggressive or violent or whatever, then you're going to be massively disproportionately shown in terms of like committing crimes, right? Or if women are taking care of kids more because they're single parents because men leave them, men that are out in those lives are going to be like more predisposed towards committing crime. Like there's a lot of things that go into like men committing more crime than women because of like the gender roles we've constructed in society, which are going to be really, really, really hard to just get rid of, as opposed to just saying like, hey, black people and white people probably shouldn't be treated differently. That's a way easier issue to tackle, I think.
That sort of disproves, that kind of proves my point in that we can't just look at the data and say, oh, if men are arrested more than women, that proves that the system's systemically prejudiced against men. We say, wait a minute, there could be cultural factors, there could be all kinds of reasons.
Well, yeah,
we should look into
the cultural factors are part of the reason, right? Like,
right. So then why wouldn't we be able to look at cultural factors when we look at things like, we just have to say, well, the numbers prove that black people are treated worse by police, therefore it must be racist.
Well, the cultural factors can prove it both ways, right? Like culture can be a reason why a system is prejudiced against something. So, for instance, I don't think there might be some people, but I don't think anybody denies that men are treated more harshly in family courts than women are. Like, most people seem to be on board with that, which is good. And the reason why probably has to do with the confluence of a ton of different, like, cultural factors.
Right. I agree. I would say the exact same thing.
Yeah, and that's wrong. It's bad. It's not good.
I agree, and I agree with the same thing when it comes to cultural factors in the black community. I agree it's not good, but I don't think that proves the point that, because again, what we've agreed that yes, you could have selective outrage, you could selectively push cases, because look, we have a country of 300 million people plus, we have 800,000 law enforcement. You could pick any race or any gender or any sexual preference and probably find a video of a cop behaving heinously to someone of that group. So if your narrative was, this proves that police are prejudiced against this group, it would be easy to prove.
I mean, people say that, but it seems pretty hard to find videos of like white people, you know, like white college kids having the cops called on them, or white college professors having the cops called on them because they're outside their house, right? But this just happened to, like, this happened to a very famously under Obama. I remember a black college professor had to deal with this, or a white college kid having 5 cruisers pull up behind him and pulling him out of the car and you know, jumping on him because he matched a description. But that did happen to a black college kid, or a white guy in a car saying, "Hey, I have a gun, don't shoot," and the cop just executing him in front of his girlfriend and a child. Like, these seem to be happening. It seems a lot harder. Like, I know we can find videos of tragic encounters that white people have with the cops. Ben Schaefer comes to mind. Holy shit! But
right, yeah.
But like, there are a lot of these issues that come up with black people where it's like, holy fuck, and it doesn't seem like these types of instances happen with white people as much.
Well, I don't know that the data backs that. Like, I think that the best study I've seen was a Harvard professor, and I'm sorry I forget his name, from 2016, and he kind of speaks to agreeing with what you're saying, that when it came to low-level stops and like tickets and things like that, there was a disproportional I don't remember, I'm not going to BS you and claim I remember the percentage, but yeah, he agreed with you that in those types of stops, it did seem more likely that blacks were suffering at the hands of law enforcement more than whites. But that same study also showed that within the margin of error, unarmed blacks were actually being shot less than unarmed whites per capita, your chance, not the total numbers, because we know the numbers are far more white people are shot and killed by police than blacks.
Sure, and that's and that's possible. And there's going to be like a lot of different things that go into that in terms of like the percentage of each people committing crime and the areas that they're in. I'm sure, right, that make these like really complicated. But even if that is true, it does seem to be that there seems to be some case of like black mistreatment at the hands of police officers that cause like this level of resentment, even if it's something as stupid as a low-level stops, right? Like, if you're nervous or anxious, like every time you see like a cop, you know, or if cops are profiling you in certain ways where, you know, black people get the cops calling them for like cleaning up trash on the street, or a black person gets a cops called on them because they want to use a restroom in a Starbucks or whatever. Like, I don't know, like, I mean, like this stuff. And then when you filter all of that down to seeing videos of cops like extrajudiciously murdering other black people, and then like other cops just standing by and watching, I mean, I think that can lead to a lot of resentment, and I think that that's like an issue that is race related that needs to be addressed. Have you ever seen? I don't know, you're a gun guy, right, or whatever?
It's not my big issue, but sure, I just want a second about it.
Like, have you ever seen videos of like white kids? Well, I hate open carry fuckers. Okay, I think it's the dumbest thing in the world. To each their own. But like, people that open carry are usually always looking for drama. But like, when you see white kids walk around with not AK-47, sorry, like AR-15s, like open carrying and shit, like, cops walk up to him like, yo, dude, what are you doing? What's up? Blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, just checking what's going on. Yeah. When black people open carry with AR-15s, even strapped to their back, man, dude, there's a video of a black guy walking around and like 7 cop cars end up like coming out, guns drawn. He was totally legal. He was in open carry state. There was no probable cause, no nothing. They just gotten a call that a black person had a gun out. Like, that was it. Like, man, I like, it seems like there are like very specifically like race issues that probably need to be addressed that go beyond just socioeconomic issues or anything like that.
I think that, again, is there a chance that you could just be seeing that because it's selectively pushed in part of the narrative? We could agree, I think we're agreeing, that when it comes to the actual deaths, that's the case. That the media, it's just like the old adage that, like, if a white girl gets kidnapped, the media goes nuts. If some black girl gets kidnapped, no one cares, right? It seems the same way with these murders. If a cop shoots someone and they're white, it's rarely reported on. If they shoot someone in black, it becomes a national story. And sometimes that national story then is based on a lie, like Michael Brown and Hands Up, Don't Shoot. That's still being chanted by rioters today. And when we build kind of this narrative based on a lie, because even though I think that we could have a disagreement, or not even necessarily a disagreement, I think you're right to have a reasonable discussion about race. But the rioters and like what you heard people that are leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement speaking about were unarmed black men being killed by police. And that's not based in reality in the fact that it's disproportionate. But it's the narrative seems like that because people in positions of power selectively push that story.
Maybe, man. I don't know. I guess we just have to find. I mean, like it seems really hard to find videos of like all these white people like being unfairly extrajudiciously killed and murdered by cops. Like, it seems like pretty hard to find. But I mean, going by just videos isn't the best way to do it, of course. But like, right. I don't know, man. There are like so many times where it happens to a black person. It's like Jesus. And then again, like we're only talking about like the extrajudicial murders, which is like the worst of the worst. But there are like other issues too, where like black people are disproportionately stopped, like for less like severe things, but still things that cause like an overall level of like mistrust in police officers. That probably should be addressed as well, right?
Yeah, but I don't think that's fair. That's a fair conversation to have. But when we don't build the conversation based on that truth and we build it on this lie of there's systemic rape, this country's a racist country, police are racist, they're out there hunting unarmed black men, and we don't have proof, even in this case with George Floyd, there's no doubt in my mind this cop's a murderer. None. And the 3 cops that were there with him should also go to prison. Like, no doubt in my mind. But we don't have proof that it was for racial reasons. We have just as much proof that he killed George Floyd for being a man that we do that he killed him for being black, which is exactly 0.
Well, yeah, I don't think people are accusing that or maybe they do, I don't know. But I don't think the problem is so much that they killed him for racial reasons, so much as that it just seems to be like a case of a black man getting murdered in the street by white cops that are standing by and watching it happen, and like nobody did anything. Like, I think that seems to be like the overall problem here, rather than like, oh, the cops were performing like a hate crime against a black person.
But oftentimes you hear the people that are protesting and rioting are shouting about racist police. So they're not, and they're using George Floyd's name. So they're not saying, we think this was a heinous action, but race wasn't a factor. They're saying this was an act that was committed by a racist.
Well,
and
I guess that's one way to read into it. I don't know, but my takeaway is more just like this is like another killing of like a black guy at the hands of white police that like just seems like impossible. Like, it just seems like something that would be so hard to imagine happening to a white person. That a white person gets pulled over by cops for a non-violent crime, like thrown onto the street, not resisting, kneeled on for 10 minutes while other white cops stand by and watch it. It seems like something that just doesn't really happen to white people. That seems to be the case.
But it did. It happened to Tony Tippa in 2016 in a worse incident where at least one of the cops was a different race than him. Daniel Shaver is the worst incident I've ever seen of a shooting. A man's in a hotel, white guy's in a hotel, crawling, begging for his life, as the cop points an AR-15.
Yeah, the Shaver thing it was incredibly fucking stupid, for sure.
That's the worst thing I've ever seen, as far as a cop shooting.
Yeah, for sure. The Shaver thing was super, super, super fucked up.
I mean, it's out there. And then the other thing is, like, and the numbers don't lie. White people by far are shot more than black people. Now, I'll grant you that not when you look at per capita. But then you have to factor in, like, but how many violent crimes are police interacting with per capita per person? I don't think it's necessarily a race thing. I think it's if you're a police officer and you're more likely to be patrolling an area where there's violence, you're more likely to be involved in a violent situation, whether it be justified or unjustified. So,
yeah, but that's kind of how it goes. So like, there's this weird data problem that we have where like, let's say that you have 2 cities or 2 city blocks. let's say one of them has a 51% crime rate and one of them has a 49% crime rate. And let's say that you've got to divvy up your police budget for the year, right? You only have so many officers and you have so many routes that you can patrol. Well, you're going to assign a few more people to the 51% area than the 49% area, just because you have to, right? And when you assign more cops in an area, like, well, now that you get more cops there, you're going to find more crime. It's just going to happen. More police are going to catch more things. So now all of a sudden that 51-49 divide becomes maybe a 55-45 divide. And it's like, okay, well, wait, hold on. There actually is like a lot of crime going on here, right? And then you assign even more and more police officers. And what happens is that the more officers you put in an area, the more crime you're going to find. And I think that this idea, this weird statistical problem is what leads to things where, like, I'm pretty sure self-reported usage rates of usage of marijuana between black people and white people are similar, but black people get arrested like 5 times more than white people for like marijuana related crimes, not just for selling, but just for using or carrying. And it's like, and again, I think it's important to say it's not because like every single cop is this racist, horrible monster that's trying to find black people using marijuana. It's just that like the whole system seems to be geared in such a way that like if you're black, you just kind of get fucked. And it's really frustrating because there's no particular place to aim your anger because there's not any individual. It's not like there's a guy at the bank that's like, I hate N-words. I hate black people. I'm not going to lend him money. Like, it's never that. Or like a cop that's like, I'm going to go out and kill some black people today. But it's rather, it's more like insidious stuff. Like the 2007 housing crisis, like when that wiped out wealth between families and the economy started to recover, a lot of black communities never recovered. Like, they just didn't. A lot of black businesses and a lot of black neighborhoods never fully recovered from the Rodney King riots. Like it seems like there's this like systemic issue relating to black people that, and then all of this stuff bleeds over into everything else too, right? Where like if you're more poor, if your schools are more shitty, if there are more cops patrolling your area, like, yeah, of course you're going to find more black kids that are unemployed and out of school and that are being heavily policed are using marijuana, right? Or are selling drugs or are getting caught by cops like doing drugs. Like, I think that all of that just kind of like plays into such a thing where it, like, in some ways what you're talking about, how like, well, if we look at the stats, blah, 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 in some ways that's even more frustrating because it's like, yeah, fuck, there isn't like one thing I can point to and go, yeah, this is how everybody's fucking me. Like, it's like this whole system just comes together to kind of like fuck over groups of people in a certain way. And I think that's where the frustration comes from. Sorry.
But no. I think that was a very good argument. I think, though, that like one of the problems I have with that is when we were talking about the disparity between men and women and law enforcement, we talked about cultural divides. My guess is, I'm kind of pulling this out of my butt, but my guess is women probably use marijuana in a similar amount as men, would be my guess.
Sure.
Yet charges for men with marijuana are through the roof compared to charges with women. And that's in the same communities. So the argument that that's a result of over-policing doesn't seem necessarily to hold up.
Well, but it could be true as well for you keep bringing up the man thing. The problem with the man thing is that to address that, all of the people that are complaining about the man thing, like, probably don't want to actually address those man problems, right? So for instance, like on one hand, I'm not saying you do this, but somebody will say like, I think it's bullshit that men are treated unfairly by the prison system. Men get fucked by family courts. That men commit suicide at higher rates. This is all bullshit. And then when you come out, it's like, yeah, I kind of agree with that. Like, this is really fucked. Like, for instance, I think men should be able to talk about their emotions more, should be more into, and you're like, no, that's some pussy ass bullshit. Men should be men that go to war and take care of their families and are men. And it's like, okay, well, when you push that hardcore masculine image, like, that's toxic as fuck. And you can draw a straight line from men need to be men and they need to suck it up and deal with it to guys that go off to military combat, never tell anybody about their feelings, and then fucking hang themselves in their basements because of shit they saw, over the sandbox. Like, that shit is fucked. But people never want to actually like deal with the whole issue. They like, you get this weird shit where some people are like, oh yeah, like, this is a problem, but when you try to address it, these same people are like, I don't believe in toxic masculinity. That's not a real thing. And I was like, that's literally what you're describing, my dude. It's like men who feel like they can't talk about their emotions, they can't share their feelings with anybody, they like have to act a certain way, and then of course they're going to be treated unfairly as a result of everything else. Not that that's right, it is fucked up, I agree, but yeah.
I mean, I think there's possibly something. By the way, I love your chat. I learned that I have a terrible voice and I say basically all the time so far, but
no, it's
I don't I don't mind at all. But no, but that seems possibly like victim shaming in some sense. So we're talking about police treating men unfairly, and you're like, well, that's because toxic masculinity. You could, if you made that argument with race, it would be absurd. If you were like, well, the police treat blacks unfairly, and you were like, well, that's because blacks have a culture where they're unafraid to talk about their feelings and they have to be uber masculine.
No, I would make the same argument. Like, but the thing is, you have to ask why. Like, there are quote unquote good reasons, or there are reasons why police treat black people differently. Black people do commit more crimes per capita than white people in terms of violent crime. Like, black people are in areas that are more heavily policed. Like, black people probably are more likely to sell drugs. But the question is, why is it like that? Do we believe that black people intrinsically do it, or are there other like larger systemic issues at play that we need to address? Same thing as with men. There are reasons why men are probably treated more harshly in a variety of ways than women. But these are reasons where we can say like, well, why does this happen, and what can we do to change it?
I agree. And so when we default to say it's systemic racism instead of looking at all the other factors, that's what leads to just accepting that at face value is what ultimately leads to then when you have people in positions of power that selectively push an issue or an incident, which inevitably it's going to happen. Cops are going to kill black people. They're going to kill white people. They're going to kill men, women. So when you just say, well, we've defaulted, the debate's over, it's systemic racism. Oh, look, here's a black man getting killed by the cops. That proves that there's systemic racism, and now we feel we need to riot. The problem is when you look at leaders then in the black community and you say, well, what are some real solutions that we could do to end this, to end the racism of police? They'll say things like, we need to tear down systemic racism. Well, what does that mean? That's not a real world solution. If we actually looked at things and said, well, what's causing these problems in these communities? What's causing the antagonistic relationships with police? Then maybe we could get to some real solutions. But instead, we're rioting right now because it seems like there's no solution.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but so would every single black person in America. The problem is that these issues haven't ever been addressed, and people keep ignoring that they even exist. Like, of course, black people in America are like, if we had better schools, like, our kids wouldn't be out selling drugs or shooting people up. But, like, conservatives make fun of shit like that. Like, we don't think we need to do anything about our schools. Our schools are fine. Or people don't want to change the way that property taxes are divvied up in districts around the United States for schools. Like, the problem is that, like, people talk about these smaller systemic issues all the time, but instead from conservatives, usually you just get, like, a pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative, and you don't actually get any real change on any of this, right? Why is the DEA still treating, cannabis as a Schedule I fucking drug? Like, there's no reason why this should happen. And this type of thing alone fucks over so many fucking black people. Like, it's insane. Or why is, like, Betsy DeVos, like, the head of fucking education? Why do we have these weird tax cuts that are going through that are still like where they still try to like make teachers not be able to write off buying school supplies as a fucking tax expense? Like, this kind of shit is unreal. People complain about this all the time, but when you complain about little things like this, conservatives make fun of you, right? Remember when I remember this line where conservatives were talking about, we just read actually about this a little bit, where conservatives are making fun of people like, oh, you think having more basketball courts is going to stop people from committing crime? LOL. Like, when you talk about the smaller issues, people make fun of you for it. Like, oh wow, like extracurricular activities is going to keep, little Jamal from going out and murdering white people. Like, well, maybe not on its own, but like as a collection of like larger reforms, yeah, having shit to do actually does discourage people from committing crimes. When you're studying for AP exams and you've got like, art class and band and shit after school or whatever, you don't really have as much time to go out on the streets and sell fucking crack. Or when there are better economic opportunities available to your parents and your mom can stay home and help you with schoolwork and pick you up from school and like, make sure that you're on the right track. Like, yeah, shit like that does help for sure.
Well, let me say it's sort of an olive branch. One of the things, I ran for Congress as a Republican. One of the things that outrages me about the Republican Party, this is a true story. I asked them, I'm like, as a party, what are we doing to reach out to different demographics? They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, young people, single women, inner city people, right? Those groups traditionally don't vote Republican. And you know what I was told? Well, we only go after the low-hanging fruit. And I think that's outrageous. If I was someone in the black community and I had to pick between a Democratic Party that I don't think really does much to help me or a Republican Party that totally ignores me, I'd probably pick the Democratic Party. I don't blame them at all. And when I'm talking to people that have leadership roles in the Republican Party that are like, well, why would we go into the inner city? They won't vote for us anyways. Well, yeah, no wonder they won't vote for you because you won't go in the inner city. So I can't, obviously I can't speak for everyone. And I think that there is a lot of truth to what you're saying, that a lot of people that are conservative or Republican think like you do, or think like you say they do. But that's not who I am. I think that, but I do think that where I will disagree with you is this kind of the argument, the pick them up by the bootstraps argument and kind of downplaying on what that means. I think if we look at, for example, some of the problems we see in the black community, like most studies show that the three things you need to do to have a life where you don't end up in prison, you have a pretty successful life is graduate high school, have a full-time job, and be raised in a two-parent household. Moynihan, who was a Democrat in, I think, 62, released a report that said that it was a national disgrace that 25% of black children were born out of wedlock. Then we issued the war on poverty, and now it's 75%. So it seems to me that the solutions that's being offered, which is focusing on race and what I would consider this pushing this narrative of victimhood, has actually been a self-fulfilling prophecy, where instead if we would try to treat everyone as individuals, and instead of focusing on race and focus on things like poverty, that would be a better way, I think, that would be able to solve these problems without being based on this false narrative.
That would be, I would agree with you so much if Republicans actually cared about poverty, though. I don't think we'd be having this conversation if Republicans actually cared about poverty. Like, look at that list that you just gave. Even if I were to accept that that list is true, and I'm sure it's highly correlational, right? 2 of the 3 of these things, you as a kid have no control over. Graduate high school, get a full-time job, raised in a 2-parent household. I don't get to choose if I'm raised in a 2-parent household or not. And whether or not I graduate high school is so much having to do with like parental input. I wouldn't expect a 10-year-old to be self-destined or self-actualized enough to determine like what the appropriate future that they should have for themselves is, right? Like 2 of the 3 of these things are heavily involved on your parents. So like right out the gate, you're already like fucked. If you're not starting off with a good foundation. This idea that like we shouldn't focus on race, we should focus on poverty. I mean, I do think that there are specific things that happen in the United States that are related to race. But again, like I could almost buy into that, but it doesn't seem like Republicans ever want to do anything about poverty. It seems like it's like, okay, let's not talk about race, let's talk about poverty. Okay, well, what do you want to talk about poverty? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Oh. So you don't actually want to like talk about or do anything. Like that's the feeling that it seems to be. Like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like Republicans do much to help poor people, do they? Am I just missing all these like Republican initiatives where they try to?
Listen, would you, just real quick as an aside, would you call yourself a Democrat?
At this point, yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, I call myself a Republican. I think we would both agree that the establishment sucks, both the Republicans and Democrats. Like, you would probably agree with that, right?
I would say that both the Democrats and the Republicans suck 100%. The same way that having an eyelash in your eye sucks and having cancer sucks. Both of them suck. But one of these is way fucking worse than the other. So while I will agree that the establishment is bad on both ends, it's not even remotely close to the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans in right now where we're at. But go ahead.
I agree, except I think it's totally inverse. So, for example, if the situation's gotten so much worse in the Black community that warrants riots occurring right now, who's had the leadership in those communities for the past 50 years?
Leadership is a lot of different things. I mean, like, just mayors are one thing. You've got mayors, you've got governors, you've got federal level initiatives. Like, I mean, you can't just say that, like, well, you were the mayor of a black city, so you ought to be able to, like, you know, get federal funding and everything for your schools or massively, you know, reshape the country or how the entire country, like, addresses these issues. Like, I mean, like, local leadership is just one thing. And it's not like Republicans have stepped into any of these places and fixed any of these problems. Like,
I agree, Republicans haven't fixed them, but they've gotten worse, and we know at the state, or at least at the city level, it's been almost 100% Democrats. I would say it would be fair to say at the state and federal levels, at best, it's been 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. Now, if the Democrats were really concerned about these issues, why have things gotten worse? Is the argument really Democrats have been trying their damnedest, but Republicans have kept them back?
Or that they don't have the necessary tools to get what they need done. Sure, funding for these programs is expensive as fuck. And like, what have we done under Trump? We've slashed our tax receipts, right? We cut federal funding to programs all the time.
Yet, when it comes to economic numbers, the Black community is doing better under Trump than it was under Obama by a landslide.
Okay, so firstly, Obama had a literal housing crisis that was basically thrust onto him that he had no way of possibly like doing anything about before it came in. Okay, so one, I don't know if that's true. Okay, number two, one, I don't think it's fair necessarily to compare that to 101. And then two, I don't know where the Black community is going to be after the coronavirus stuff and after all of the other catastrophic shit that's happened under Trump now, because didn't we just have like years of stock market gains completely fucking wiped out? And now we've got 40 million unemployed people, and it seemed like the employment number is one of the biggest things that Trump was pushing.
40%. I don't know if this is true. I read this today. 40% of Black adult males are unemployed now.
Yeah,
after
that
the
wouldn't.
COVID lockdowns. I mean, it's tragic. It's unreal. That's an unreal number for that community. I don't know that we could put that at the foot of Republicans. I'll tell you right now that the biggest heat I got as someone who supports Trump is that I've called Trump out the entire time over this ridiculous lockdown, which has directly. Go ahead. Sorry.
So wait, do we just not lock down and just let not tens of thousands, because we're already at 100,000. We get millions of people die and not lock down anything, or?
Where was proof that millions were going to die?
Well, we literally have one of the most aggressive quarantine lockdowns in the history of our country, and we still lost 100,000. So my guess is going to be that, like, had we not locked down anything, it would have been not multiplicatively worse, but probably exponentially worse. That it would have been that the numbers would have easily been in the millions, probably. Like,
oh, okay, well, there's the Imperial College data and the actual infected. It was based on a 2% infected fatality ratio. The CDC now admits it's going to be more like 0.25. Even in Denmark, a country that locked down, and everyone said, oh, see, Sweden's worse than Denmark without Sweden's lockdown. The director of health in Denmark admitted that they could have achieved their good numbers without a lockdown. So I don't see any proof whatsoever. Number after number. For example, we were told that Georgia and Florida were committing human sacrifices by alleviating the lockdown earlier. None of that happened.
To be clear, I'm not saying that I 100% think a lockdown is the way to go. The lockdown was our only option after the failure of leadership of Trump. A much better way to handle things would have been to have massive amounts of testing ready to go as soon as China banned the travel thing, and the ability to do like contract tracing stuff. That would have been the superior way. But in lieu of that, because we didn't have that, because we had an absolute failure in leadership, the lockdown was our next step. We have no way to track infections. It took us so long to get testing out that, yeah, we had to do the lockdown because we had no other option.
But even Dr. Fauci was saying in January that the COVID virus was nothing to be worried about. So were a majority of mainstream outlets. You had Democrats saying that Trump was racist and xenophobic for trying to stop flights
boo
from
fucking
China
who.
and
First
Europe.
of all, I don't care what the Democrats are saying to Trump, okay?
Right.
Trump is the president. He's the leader. We elected Trump because he's a big businessman. This is what you do as a leader, okay? Don't cry because another business guy is calling you out. This is part of your job. So firstly, so anything about the whataboutism between Democrats calling him, xenophobic, blah, blah, don't give a fuck, okay? Also, there are good reasons to call Trump xenophobic, and he's explicitly done it over and over again. For instance, calling it the Chinese virus repeatedly over and over again. I think he even made another reference to that a week ago. But regardless of that, crying about who is xenophobic, blah, 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 doesn't matter. The problem is that Trump did nothing between banning travel from China and banning travel from Europe. We sat around for 5 weeks while the world was brought to its knees by a global pandemic and did nothing. We just watched it happen. Then we banned travel from Europe, and then we're like, oh, well, fuck. What do? We literally can't even fucking test people. I guess we need to lock down the entire economy. Like,
since it was a travesty, I'm sure you have the numbers. How many more people died of COVID around the world than the amount of people that die on average? For example, in Italy, it was a disaster that after 3 months of COVID, 3,500 people had died. Only, it turns out, on an average year, influenza kills 2,800 people a month in Italy. Now, magically, this year, influenza is only killing about 300 people a month in Italy. So the total deaths in Italy are only marginally a couple percent higher than it would be under a bad influenza season when we combine influenza and COVID.
I've heard people say this, and I've tried to find these numbers, but if you go and you search, anytime you try to find any information about misreporting of COVID deaths, unanimously, anybody that looks at this says that most likely it's severely underreported. Right, like if you look at, for instance, I don't remember if it was the New York Times, somebody else did a massive article on the average number of deaths around the world in places that had COVID-19. These things spiked up like 2 or 3 times as much due to like diseases and shit around the time that COVID-19 started. This idea that like, oh well, it's not really killing any more people, or oh, it's just replacing flu deaths. Totally not true. Totally not borne out in anything that I've seen whatsoever. It was the New York Times, or you can look at this later on stream or whatever.
So then let's just say if we come back and have a discussion a year from now, what's your prediction then based on what you're looking at on a percentage of how many more deaths we've had a month over COVID than an average year?
A percentage of how many more deaths? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know how many people die altogether from like normal disease. I think in a normal flu season, isn't it anywhere from 10 to 30,000 deaths? Or what is a normal flu season?
I think in 2018, if I remember, it was close to 60,000.
That might have been like a slightly higher year. I'm trying to remember what is like the average?
I'd be wrong. Someone could correct me in the chat. I think it's between 50 and 60,000.
Okay, it might be higher than that. It might be like 50 to 60,000, right? Is the average number of deaths for the flu, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what the flu deaths are sitting at right now for the United States, but we've already climbed to twice the average for the coronavirus, and that's with a total 2-month fucking lockdown on our economy. That's taking draconian measures to stop it. We're still at twice as much as the average flu death.
That's right. So we just got done with the discussion about the devastation that occurs in the Black community largely because economic poverty. So to save 50,000 people, we've devastated the economy, caused 40% unemployment with Black males. You don't think that was a huge mistake that's going to see repercussions? And then I could get to specifics how the lockdown, not only do we not have proof that it saved any lives, we actually have definitive proof that some of the lockdowns killed people. For example, in my state of Pennsylvania, to see if this makes sense to you, Governor Tom Wolf told me that if I wasn't for the lockdown and I wanted to go to my job, I wanted my grandparents to die. I wanted old people to die. So we did the lockdown. And what Tom Wolf did was he took COVID patients that tested positive for COVID and he forced nursing homes to take them. So he knew old people were the most vulnerable population, yet he forced old people to be in a situation where they were locked indoors with COVID. Then predictably, almost 70% of deaths in Pennsylvania are from nursing homes. Now that's all based on the lockdown that occurred.
I just don't know about this. I would have to look into it. But like, regardless, like when you say, I don't know about the specific case of somebody locking in people with coronavirus patients, but when you talk about how like, well, just save 50,000 lives, my point is that we don't know how many lives we saved, right? We have no idea. Right. But like, there could have been over 1 million deaths from coronavirus related stuff had we not done a draconian level lockdown. Like, so you agree that that number would have been higher, right?
I think it would have, but I don't know how much, and that's the problem. See, I'm okay. I'm not a full libertarian. I'm okay with sacrificing some of my rights, but on the condition that the government be as transparent as possible and explain why the sacrifice of my rights is necessary and how it will make the situation better. Because we can all agree the idea that Joe Biden was pushing of not one death is garbage. We're not going to shut.
Sure, no one cares about that. Not one death is stupid, of course. That's stupid.
Right. So
but like, if we're at 110,000, this will probably level out at around 130, 140,000. Also, you were comparing this with the flu, by the way. This is over the case of a few months for the COVID-19 deaths, right? Flu is the entire year.
No, but the flu numbers are almost 5 months is the vast majority of all flu deaths.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And well, we've also got like a whole year to see if we get a second wave of coronavirus infections or anything, right? So, like. This number, if it would have been 200 or 300 or 400,000, right? If we would have had the economy open the entire time, there still would have been downstream negative impacts of economic harm caused by the coronavirus as well. Maybe not quite as severe as what we're at right now. Maybe more severe. It's hard to say. Like,
but we don't have any. Like, when did it become that our rights and our economy? It's the burden of proofs on you to prove that it shouldn't shut down. So you're admitting we have no idea how many people could die. So we had no choice but to be shut down. That's absurd. That would be the equivalent of the government passing the Patriot Act. Well, we don't know if terrorists are going to get us, so we have to spy on you. That spying's necessary.
But sometimes there are things that you just can't prove that you have because the proof of them would be horrible. There's a reason why we don't double blind test parachutes, right? Like, well, how do I know this parachute works? I haven't seen 10 people jump out of a plane with and without a parachute to see which one survived. Like, well, at some level, like testing something in and of itself is horrible. This idea that like, oh, well, maybe we should have kept the economy open. Okay, 1.5 million people died. Maybe we should have closed it. LOL. Like, I mean, you kind of have to make predictions and go with your predictions at that point. And the higher parts of the tail end of that data show that up to 2 million or 3 million people could theoretically die if we do nothing, right?
That was the Imperial College study, which has been debunked thoroughly.
What do you mean debunked? Hold on. I mean, conservatives do this
by the CDC. The CDC debunked it. They said that the projection of what it did was it took a model of how much it would spread, and then it said, and the infected fatality rate will be 2%.
Nerd.
The CDC says no. Now the number is 0.25%.
And so that number, that fatality number, but the fatality number could have been higher. It could have been 5 or 10%. If more people are infected and hospitals aren't capable of dealing with the influx of people, then that fatality number climbs dramatically.
Where is there any? Was Sweden overran? Were their hospitals overran?
I don't know how Sweden's hospital is doing right now in particular. However, one, Sweden has a socialized healthcare system, so they probably have the ability to allocate funds more effectively to deal with this. Two, Sweden has had higher death rates than I believe every other Scandinavian country that's dealing with the COVID-19 stuff.
Right, but it's still far lower than those that had the biggest lockdown, such as the UK. And even Denmark admits, the Department of Health in Denmark even admitted we didn't need the lockdown to keep numbers this low. And the same experts...
Well, I'm curious. Wait, actually, can you link me that? We can take a minute to find this. I want to see exactly what the Department of Denmark said. I'm really curious about this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I have trouble talking because I'm still at 1.
Yeah, no problem. I find that when these quotes are given by people, when I look them up, it's actually like, well, he said that we didn't need the lockdown, but in actuality, like what the quote ends up being is like the Denmark, the head of the Denmark CDC or whatever said that we probably could have taken slightly less aggressive measures in doing a lockdown, and perhaps after a month or two of it, we could have moved to contact tracing and social distancing. That it ends up being like a far more nuanced quote than just lockdown bad. That's usually what I feel like I find after I find the actual quotes themselves.
Well, they did say, I will tell you this, they did say that they could have had social distancing measures that was successful that didn't require the lockdown. Let me see. I didn't have this saved on my computer. I didn't know we'd be talking about this, so I do apologize for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Let me see. I'll dig it up for you.
Apparently, Norway, Denmark, and Finland aren't even accepting Swedes to enter their country because of the Swedish lack of lockdown, too. Is what someone in chat said. I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't know. Most countries shut down significant part of their borders from other places. They didn't get called xenophobic either. It was weird.
I've also seen this posted a few times, too, that there was a study saying that had the lockdown in the United States occurred 3 weeks earlier, that we could have avoided some 40 or 50,000 deaths as well. Although I haven't looked at the methodology for the study or anything. But
so, okay, you want the... by the way, I could be wrong. It could be Finland that I'm talking about, not Denmark.
Sure.
So, like, I'm on some online blogs, and that's where I was posting some looking there. But I do have another... It was Norway. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Do you have Google Translate? You can
Google
can
translates everything automatically. Yeah.
Okay. I'll put it in the Discord here. I just sent it as the message to you, but it'll be in Norwegian.
All right. Hold on 1 second.
Yep. Did you get that?
Yep.
Okay.
Where's the thing that pops up that asks me to translate this, guys?
I think I have another copy of it. I think it's the exact same article from a different... If you'd like me to send it, it's...
Oh, never mind. Hold on. I got it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so just in reading the title of the article, okay? Or the headline of the article, okay? We might have been able to gain control of the infection without shutting down so strongly.
Right.
So hold on, I'm just reading.
Go ahead. Yeah, read it.
Does not mean that we do not stand by the advice we gave now, given the knowledge base we had at the time. Our assessment now, and I find that there is a broad consensus in connection with the reopening, was that we could achieve perhaps the same effect and avoid some of the unfortunate effects of the ring by not closing, but by keeping open with infection control measures. So This is something that I don't necessarily disagree with. However, we couldn't do this in the United States because we didn't have testing. So we had zero infection control measures because we couldn't test.
But you don't need... I don't disagree that testing would be better, but we don't need... For example, this was my recommendation. Before we say, oh, based on some fear, we should strip us of our Bill of Rights protection and collapse the economy, the very first thing we should have done and said, who are the people most likely to be significantly infected by this? And I think even a layman like me could understand, probably the very old and people with comorbidities, right? So the very first thing we should have did was keep the economy open and direct all of the resources we could to making sure those people got testing, got PPE, had shelter, had places. Was there failure of leadership on Republicans and Trump with this? Absolutely. Absolutely, it was a failure. But instead, we embraced the total lockdowns, which means not only do we not direct all of our resources to the elderly, we actually spread it around to everyone equally so they got less resources, and we harmed our economy, which led to less total resources anyways. And then the coup de grace was we forced these old people into the places where we knew COVID would be. And now we see that countrywide, I believe it's 48% at this point of all deaths are in nursing homes. And worldwide, those numbers are very similar. That was, even Sweden admits, the big mistake we made was not properly dealing with nursing homes. We were so focused on lockdown everything that we stripped people of their rights, collapsed the economy.
Wait, even who said that?
Who said that? Sweden's admitting that they needed, that a huge mistake they made was not properly dealing with nursing homes.
Wait, okay. Sweden explicitly didn't lock down their country, though, right?
Right. And they're saying still the mistake they made was they didn't do enough to protect nurses. I agree. And let me give you another example. So Neil Ferguson, who did the Imperial College model, the 2.2 million Americans would die model. So he's famous because he predicted, I believe in 2003, that the bird flu would kill 15 million Brits. It killed 155 over a 5-year period. He predicted that hundreds of thousands of people would die of mad cow disease, so they slaughtered 6 million cows and sheep. The number ended up being about 200 people. But that's the guy whose model we accepted. Now, when he finally released his source code for the model, scientists in Uppsala University in Sweden used that model and put in the data from Sweden to apply. I'll send you.
I don't understand what obsessing over one bad model has to do with any of the broader arguments here. Because your argument for the lockdown was millions could have died. Well, there was only one model that said that, and it was wrong. Okay, but so right now, you agree that we have taken some of the most extreme measures imaginable over the past 2 months, right?
Yes.
You agree that over 100,000 people have died from COVID-19, right?
I don't know. I can't trust the numbers one way or another. It could be more or less than that.
Okay.
I don't know.
So if we know that around 100,000 died, and we know that that was even with insanely draconian measures in place, you don't think that number could have been far, far higher if we did nothing at all?
But there's no proof. For example, you said we waited too long, correct? We waited too long for testing, correct? You
for sure.
That. Okay, so the lockdown would only save lives if it was done in time. Now, if we waited too long for testing, we didn't do the lockdown, and we also waited too long for it. So where is the evidence? Because here's the problem. We
could compare like Sweden to any other country, and Sweden's per capita death toll is like twice as much as every other neighboring Scandinavian country that like had lockdown measures in place. Like, who's to say that our thing wouldn't be higher as well, in line with what Sweden's death toll was?
But even Norway admits that they didn't have to lock down to do this. And still, why does it matter that they're close to the geographic location? We could see that, for examples that have similar socialized health systems like the UK, they completely locked down, and their numbers are way worse than Sweden. And it wasn't just, look, here's the difference, and this is where
completely locked down. Hold on, well, I feel like we're running over a lot of stuff. Like, completely locked down when? So Sweden has like a 10% death rate for like coronavirus infections, or it's some absurdly high. They've got like 5 times 10. They've got like a massively high. They're like the highest in the first world in terms of death rate and in terms of deaths from coronavirus related stuff. I'm comparing them to places like Norway and Finland because I figure they probably have comparable populations, comparable governments, comparable like hospitalization things. But every other Scandinavian country around them was like, it's not 10%. I'm sorry, that was a big exaggeration. But it was like way higher than other countries, right? Like, did the UK lock down the same time as these other Scandinavian countries, or did the UK lock down like pretty late as well? Like, because there's like a lot of like timeline stuff is like pretty important here too.
Well, right, but then again, that kind of disproves the US need to lock down the way we did. It was worthless. If we waited so how can you say, like, so the argument you're making here is, well, if the UK's lockdown was later, if it was too late, that proves why their numbers are so horrendous. But at the same time, you say, oh, but if we wouldn't have locked down, the numbers would have been worse. How do you know? The problem is this: when you have a disease that has a relatively low to reasonable, or I don't know if any disease has a reasonable infected fatality rate, but when you have an infected fatality rate under 1%, like we're seeing, it's 4 times less than that with COVID. The reason that COVID's killing so many people is not that it's particularly lethal, it's because that it's spread to a lot of people. It's highly infectious. So if you don't lock down almost totally before it spreads anywhere, it's gonna get out there.
Well, that's the whole point of doing like testing and contact tracing, right?
Well,
but we couldn't do that in the US because we didn't have the testing.
But again, it's so infectious that even with testing and contact tracing, for example, the lockdown still allowed you to go to the candy shop at nighttime. You could still go to Walmart. You could still go to Lowe's.
Wait, were you going to say even with contact tracing, we couldn't have stopped it? Because South Korea and like New Zealand begged to defer it. Vietnam, a lot of these Southeast Asian countries, hardcore cracked down in that shit. And they destroyed this coronavirus stuff very quickly with really aggressive contact tracing. You don't think it would have helped at all?
But again, like, how can you then... So on one hand, you say, well, we can't really compare, the UK to Sweden because there's differences. But then on the other hand, you're like, but we'll compare all these other countries and say that that proves.
Wait, so I didn't want to compare the UK to Sweden because I was saying is, firstly, we can compare any country you want, okay? I was just saying that, like, let's compare the Sweden death rates to the other Scandinavian countries to see, like, because Sweden and those countries are highly comparable, but they took a dramatically different route than the other countries. And it seems like a lot more people died in Sweden as a result, okay? And then you wanted to compare it to the UK. It's like, well, the UK did a lockdown and they lost a lot of people too. The UK's lockdown was incredibly fucking late. They did it way after, like, they should have, after a ton of people were already fucking infected. Arguably, maybe kind of like the US did. So, of course, their shit was, like, super fucked. But, like, that's not an argument against locking down. That just shows, and also maybe even more people in the UK would have died had they locked down even later or not at all.
Can you send me evidence of when, for example, Finland locked down, or Norway, or one of the Scandinavian countries versus the UK?
Sure, give me a second.
March 23rd, I think, is what I'm finding on the UK. I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm looking it up myself. I just didn't know.
So someone in chat said the UK locked down on March 23rd and Denmark locked down on March 13th, and they closed borders even earlier than that.
So 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, and then they closed borders even earlier than that.
Okay, but again, closed borders to where? Places like China, I'm assuming?
Or I mean, if they're not even allowing Swedish people in, it sounds like it's a little bit more aggressive than that.
Okay, but so at least one of the policies that Trump tried to take, which again, I think he was an abysmal failure because he endorsed these lockdowns that were a disaster. But one of the policies he tried to do was to lock down the country. And that was roundly met with criticism at the time.
Why does that matter? Wait, why do you bring that up?
Because the argument seems to be, well, there was a failure if we would have listened to other people, but there was no one else everyone was agreeing that was the wrong decision at the time.
Okay. This is like this really weird, like, Republican, like, side argument. Fuck lockdowns, okay? And fuck travel bans. The problem was that we knew there was a problem when we locked down travel from China, and then we did nothing for 5 weeks. So all we're doing now is, like, worst case fucking scenario, like, lockdown, like, trying to pick up the pieces afterwards. It's like complaining that a guy gets a massive cut on his fucking arm, and he leaves it that way for hours, and then eventually you have to tie, like, a tourniquet around it and then amputate it, and we're complaining about, like, well, this is bullshit, he's losing his fucking arm. Like, well, yeah, well, but it's because we had a tourniquet. Well, tourniquets are bad, you're cutting off circulation, now the tissue is gonna die. Well, yeah, but it's because we waited so fucking long. Like that's all we had left. This is the problem, is that the failure in leadership that has consistently been delivered by Trump has led to these draconian measures that suck. Nobody wants to do a massive fucking lockdown. Nobody wants to do a quarantine. Nobody wants to do massive fucking travel bans. But that's all we had left when Trump wasn't able to get our CDC in line, our NIH in line, in order to get, like, hospitals the equipment they needed to deal with COVID-19 patients and to do the testing and contact tracing we needed to do. That's the problem. Like, arguing about, like, is the travel ban effective? Is the quarantine effective? Blah, blah, blah. These things suck. They probably help a little bit, but not as much as they could, because we're already fucked at that point. Now it's damage control, not prevention of, like, an epidemic, spreading.
Yeah, but using your own example, it's like we lost our arm, so we said, I know, we'll cut the other arm off with these lockdowns.
Okay.
If the arm's already lost, why are we cutting another arm off?
Okay, here's something I'm curious about. Okay, sure. So this is something that I'm curious about. Once let's say that we start reopening the economy in all of these states, and we start finding that there's a massive second wave of infections, and we lose another 100,000 people. Do you think at that point it's like, okay, maybe the lockdowns did do something, or?
I guess we'll wait and see what the evidence shows. All evidence has spoke to the opposite of that right now. But I guess
haven't there been so many places that have, like, opened up or done things, and then, like, 2 weeks later, there's, like, they're having, like, the most infections ever recorded? Like, hasn't that happened, like, a couple different times across the U.S. in different areas? I'd have
right, like, by proportion of, like, they had 7 before, and then it went up to 12, and things like that. I mean, look, they said that Georgia and Florida were going to be corona capital centers, and it was the exact opposite. Florida has a higher population density than New York, and yet, under the idea of having as limited of a lockdown as possible, it's doing worlds better than New York.
Wait.
And it's because... Sorry, go ahead.
Florida might have a higher population density than New York, but there's no way that any individual city in Florida has a higher population density than the city, like, of New York City.
That's true. That's a fair... But also, the average age of a person in Florida is much higher than the average age.
Also, I'm sorry, wait, hold on. Okay, and then also just because I had to check that, because that sounds unbelievable because New York is so small. So based on estimates, that equates to 353.4 people per square mile in Florida, which makes it the 8th most densely populated state in the U.S. In New York, so we're going from 353 people per square mile. In New York City, the demographics of New York City, it's 26,403 people per square mile.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I won't deny that, but I believe that there is far more elderly people, for example, in Florida. And at this point, I could at least say, I think in Pennsylvania, the numbers are this. Your chance of dying for COVID, if you're under the age of 80, there have been less people under the age of 80 that have died of COVID than over the age of 85. So it's basically uniquely killing very old people.
Well,
which is tragic.
So it's old people, it's people with diabetes, it's people with heart disease, hypertension, like, which are things that a lot of
numbers, though. It turns out that that's not really the case. Yes, comorbidities do drastically increase your chances of dying from COVID, but the number one factor seems to be being old with a comorbidity.
Sure, yeah, so that definitely hurts, sure. But, like, let's say that what you're saying is true, right? If 50 million people in the U.S. end up getting infected, right, and our death rate is 0.2%, like, that's still like a decent number of people dying, no?
Right, but that's why instead of shutting down the entire economy, what you do is protect the most vulnerable. The lockdowns directly led to us not doing that. Here's why Cuomo and Whitmer and Tom Wolf, here was their excuse for why they forced COVID patients into nursing homes. They said, well, we're afraid that our hospitals are going to get overran, so we need to keep our hospitals empty for when younger, healthier people come in so that they have a better chance of living. So we'll just put these old people in nursing homes and leave them deal with it. I mean, that's horrific. That's
wait. So would putting all of the old people into hospitals had been better, and then you just have the hospitals full? Or like, this sounds like a lose-lose.
No, but why would you intentionally put them in a place with other healthy people that are the most likely to die from the
okay, hold on. Okay, let's take a few minutes. What is this happening? Can I?
But you want me to send you evidence of?
Or I'm just curious, like this idea that like all the old people were just shoved into nursing homes and that's why they all died.
Right. So Cuomo, Whitmer, Tom Wolf, all of them had policies directly from their Department of Health that said that if you were elderly and you had COVID and were stable, you were put out of the hospital and back into the nursing home. All of them. In fact, there was a big scandal here in Pennsylvania because the Department of Health Secretary Levine, said that, oh, everyone will get testing in the nursing home. Your family's safe in a nursing home. And then she took her mother out of a nursing home. And then there was hardly any testing that was done in the nursing homes. And it came out that all of a sudden you had physicians coming out saying, this is a tragedy. The Department of Health in Pennsylvania is basically forcing old people back into nursing homes. And they're not providing the assets that will allow those people to be isolated properly. In fact, one doctor said specifically that the nursing homes were asked, the way to deal with this, instead of offering treatment, was to ask the old people, do you want resuscitated if you go unconscious? I mean, that's unconscionable. And that's what the lockdowns led to, because our fear was so much, oh, the hospitals might be overran, that we actually put the most vulnerable people in the worst position possible.
So this sounds like things that happen literally in the most populated places in the U.S. So I'm trying to find articles on this. So it sounds like this is one that they started to do in New York as hospitals started to fill up.
But the hospitals never got to capacity. Remember, Cuomo famously said, we need 10,000 respirators, and if we don't have them by tomorrow. Remember, they sent that ship in because they were like, hospitals are overwhelming. They never did. And so they, under the fear, the same fear that led to the lockdown, under that fear of we have to keep hospitals empty, they basically sentenced people to death. That's what having this, so how can we say the lockdown saved lives? And then when you look in places like Pennsylvania and New York, it turns out that sometimes upwards of 70% of the people dead are from nursing homes. So you have these governors that said, oh, we have to lock down or you want old people to die.
Wouldn't the majority of people dying be from nursing homes anyways, because this is something that impacts older people regardless? Like, is there actually, I'm going through this article to try to find this. So like apparently there hasn't been any evidence yet that like people in nursing homes are dying. But states are increasingly turning to nursing homes to relieve the burden on hospitals and taking COVID-19 patients considered stable enough to be released. Although there is no evidence so far that the practice has allowed infections to spread in nursing homes, many resident advocates fear that it is only a matter of time. Has this actually come out that tons of people in nursing homes are having infections spread to them from COVID-19 patients?
Yes, for example, in Pennsylvania, 70% of the people that have died have been in nursing homes.
Yeah, but that's just saying. But like, that's, I mean, like my, if I had to take a guess, and this is doing it with no data, my guess is going to be that the largest percentage of people dying literally of any disease is going to be people in nursing homes. These are the oldest and most at risk of our population, right? Like the highest percentage of people that die from fucking, fucking cancer treatments are probably in nursing homes. Like chemotherapy, the highest number of people that die from literally any disease are probably going to be in nursing homes, right? Like.
Well, right, I agree with that, but then how does that justify the lockdown of the people that aren't dying? I mean, if the argument was millions could die,
because even people that aren't dying, first of all, because even people that aren't dying, it only takes a small percentage of people dying for those to add up to massive numbers. So, for instance, like between 55 and 64 years, it looks like on average, like 2% of those people die from COVID-19. Like, and that's just going from 55 to 64. These aren't 80 and older people. 85 and older, it gets really bad, right? It's like 18 to 19% of those people die if they get infected. Like, the problem isn't that, like, if you get infected, you're going to die. The problem is that if tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people get infected all at once, that, like, a lot of those people are going to die. And by a lot, I just mean, like, an absolute value, because if the percentage is 1 or 2%, on 100 million people, that's 1 or 2 million people dead.
Yeah, but still, we can look at it, right? So what you're saying basically is saying, well, we can't say that the lockdown led to these deaths and these policies led to the deaths because a lot of old people were going to die anyways. But we can definitively say that the lockdown saved lives. I mean, that seems tenuous at best. And we have a direct comparison so we could look at this. For example, Florida, only about 30% of the people that passed away in nursing homes. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is in Florida, they did not force nursing homes to accept COVID patients. That's the difference. And that tends to be the story around the world.
But how is that impacted by the lockdown or not?
Because the lockdown, the reason that people like Cuomo and Whitmer and Tom Wolf forced these people back in the nursing homes, just like what you just read in that article. They were afraid that hospitals were going to be overwhelmed. So the lockdown, they locked down the hospitals. They locked everyone down. They said, no, we can't leave people in here because we're afraid millions could die. It wasn't the case. And then it directly led to tens of thousands. Like, here's an article from the New York Post that says 12,000 nursing home patients have passed away in nursing homes just in New York. But then people use those numbers of those deaths to say, aha, see, this justified the lockdown. Certainly, we can at least agree that the lockdown didn't help those nursing homes.
I guess what we'll have to wait and see is how things go when we start to reopen. I don't know. I talked to conservatives early on. I talked to 2 conservatives really early on about this that said that we probably weren't going to have very many people die at all. And then when I spoke to them a month later, well, 100,000 isn't that bad. They fell right in line with Trump. I guess we'll have to see after we start reopening if we get like another 50 to 100,000 people dying, you know, in addition to all of the flu deaths and everything else. I guess we'll see if, like, I hope your argument doesn't change. Like, well, you know, it's just another 100 or 200,000 people. Like, well, it's worth it now. Like, who cares if more people are dying? Like, I hope
Wait, but I'm not saying that, but there is what I was saying earlier, clearly the not one death's garbage, right? So we all have to ask ourselves, what is our threshold for when we say we could strip our Bill of Rights and we could collapse the economy? Like, there has to be not an exact number, but you have to have some idea. For example, should we shut down if it would have saved 20,000 lives?
Probably not, but I guess you're less than flu deaths there, right?
Yes. So what about flu deaths? 50. It doesn't matter. Like, we could go back. Here's the point, and maybe you could agree with me on this. I think that our leadership, Republican and Democrat across the board, failed miserably. I'm against the lockdown because I don't think that the burden of proof should be, we're going to take your rights away and collapse the economy with no proof that it will help things. None. And in fact, we can now see in many cases, at least in these nursing homes, it directly made it worse. So I think the burden of proof should be that we have, as the government, before we take your rights away, have to explain why that's necessary and how that will help the situation.
How could you do that without just having millions of people die first?
But again, that assumes that anytime the government said, for example, I just read an article here, I can send it to you if you want. Now scientists are predicting the bird flu will be 100 times worse, 100 times worse than COVID. So are we going to shut down forever? At some point, you have to say, look, there is risk in life. You need to provide proof that millions are going to die before we lock down. You can't just say, well, millions could die, so therefore we have to take your rights away.
I mean, we didn't do that for H1N1, right?
That's right.
We didn't do it for swine flu or Ebola, right?
Excellent point. And scientists, Neil Ferguson himself, who created the Imperial College model that said 2.2 million that the U.S. used to help embrace the lockdown. It was the only model the UK used for their lockdown. He suggested that millions of people would die of the bird flu. Had we listened to him, how many heads of cattle would have been slaughtered? How many years of lockdowns would we had? But it was all garbage.
So what would we need to do besides letting millions of people die to illustrate that maybe it's important to do certain lockdowns?
Protect the most vulnerable populations. Let people, until you see proof that a population is very vulnerable and is going to have a really high death rate, let them stay open. That would have resulted in far less deaths.
So if everybody in society is going about their normal business and like it's being spread massively in society, how do you keep old people safe besides doing like a lockdown?
Well, the lockdown didn't keep them safe. What you do is you provide. We weren't going to stop the spread, really. what we could do is provide the most resources possible to protect the people that the virus would have the biggest impact on.
Okay.
So so the lockdown doesn't help that at all. In fact, it led to we then spread those resources out. We said, no, everyone needs access to the hospital. And then it turned out that your chances, if you're under 50, of dying of COVID is something like 0.0001% or something.
Wait, that's you're first of all, you're dramatically underestimating those numbers, I think.
What? How many? So if you're under, wait a minute, okay. So
wait here, I'm just linking this. So this is the percentage of COVID-19 cases in the United States from February 12th to March 16th, resulting in death by age group. Right. So like if you're 20 to 44 years old, it looks like that number is around like 0.15%. It's not 0.000. Like
your chance of dying is 0.15%.
Yes.
Of COVID. How many deaths were there? Does it have the total number?
I mean, it must if it's to put this data together. But that's if you're 20 to 44. If you're 40.
How many 20? I'm sorry. It just sounds crazy to me. 1.15% of 20 to 44-year-olds in this country have died of COVID?
No. If you're infected.
Okay, right. But that's what I'm saying. So your chances of actually getting COVID and dying are insanely low.
Well, if every single person is getting COVID-19 because we're not doing anything to distance or lock down anything, then, I mean, it seems like your chance of getting it would be quite high, no?
But we already see, but again, we don't have any proof that the lockdown stopped the spread whatsoever. In fact, they started testing people in a lot of these places that they thought were locked down, and it was something like 40 to 50% of people were showing antibodies that they are actually infected. So there's no evidence whatsoever that the lockdown stopped that from. It's not like, oh, if we went in a lockdown, it would have been 100%.
Okay.
There's no.
I mean, yeah, I guess we can see when states start to reopen how things look, and then we can see if a lockdown was effective at all.
But okay, yeah, I thought it was a good discussion. But another thing. So then I think then what happened is we've exacerbated all these. So we haven't even got to the amount of deaths that will come from the economic poverty. And for example, there's a lot of deaths for things of like people that weren't getting health treatment that they otherwise would have needed because it was deemed non-essential, or they were afraid to go to the doctors and things like that. But one of the things I see that you're seeing now with the riots are, how can it be that we needed to lock down or COVID was going to kill us all? But at the same time, we see governors endorsing at least the peaceful protest. So for example, Tom Wolf in my state 2 weeks ago said people protesting in Harrisburg for their jobs were cowards who were risking all of our lives, and he would take license away for people to operate. But he gave a statement last week or just this weekend that said, these protesters are great. We need to protest racial injustice, etc.
I would have to look at the exact statements, but my guess is going to be protesting racial injustice is probably a bit more noble than protesting a loss of a job because of a like countrywide lockdown.
So I guess I'd be interested to act like a black business owner. Would you have rather kept your business or been able to go on the street and protest? I would think that maybe they would disagree that the idea that them losing their job was so flippant to say, well, protesting this murder.
It's possible, but it's also possible you ask a lot of black people, are you more scared of COVID-19 than a white person? They go, yeah, since we historically have like less access to healthcare, and because COVID-19 seems to be hurting our communities more than yours, it actually is a big deal to them. So, I mean, I don't know, that could go either way.
Right, that would seem to suggest then the black community would say, yes, because we're more afraid of COVID than white people, we don't want these riots and protests. We don't want to risk the spread of COVID over a white person killing a black man because we're more afraid of COVID.
I mean, it's possible. These things are like very loosely related. Like, I mean, I don't think anybody necessarily wants there to be like massive riots or anything. But I mean, like this killing just happened. Like people are at their homes. Like it's like a perfect storm of things that have come together. Like the coronavirus shit sucks. I mean, people are outside wearing masks at least. At least they're in outdoor environments instead of indoor environments, so hopefully the spread will be less. But I mean, I guess we'll see if there's like a massive spike. It might be that if there's a fuck ton of infections that result from all the protests, maybe people are like, oh yeah, maybe these protests were a bad idea. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, like obviously protests and riots are like things of passion and shit related to certain moments. It's probably a lot harder to get people together to riot. Like, okay, come back in 2 months, guys. Like when the quarantine is over.
I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that our leaders should, on one hand, say you can't go to work, you can't go to church, you can't protest the lockdown for your Bill of Rights, or you're a monster that wants to kill people, but you can protest a cop that killed someone in Minnesota.
Sure, maybe.
Like,
I mean, I think that people should be trying to keep themselves as safe as possible, like during the protest. Sure, like masks and everything are probably pretty important. I think like getting infected in outdoor areas is a lot harder than getting infected in indoor areas. But I mean, yeah, people should still be cognizant of that. Sure.
I mean, yeah, but that's probably true. But again, look at like what Wolf and Governor Whitmer said about the outdoor protest about the lockdown. They didn't say, "Oh, it's outdoor, just wear a mask." They were like, no, you're risking everyone's lives. They won't say that. And again, that gets back to my original point. The reason I bring it up is because this is such a racially charged thing that's been selectively pushed, in my opinion. People are afraid to actually say what they other, like, for example, let's assume that Governor Whitmer's really like, my God, these protests could spread COVID. She ain't going to say that. There ain't a chance, because she's afraid that that would be deemed saying you don't care about this black man dying. So now the leadership of that state has to say, oh my God, we're afraid that these even the peaceful protests are going to spread this virus, but we have to bite our tongue and go against science because we're afraid that we'll look bad.
I mean, I don't know what people, I haven't followed like what every person's statement is on the safety of the protests. So I don't know off the top of my head how many people have talked about like fears about coronavirus spreading in relation to protests. I don't know.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because I feel that the fact that so many people in positions of leadership instantly flipped on a switch and said, oh, okay, well, the protests are okay now. So now it's like, oh, now COVID's not a fear.
Is it? Wait, who are you citing right now? Somebody's linking statements.
Like, for example, Governor Whitmer, Governor Wolf.
So Governor Gretchen Whitmer said Monday she has a high level of concern about COVID-19 spreading during protests like the one in Lansing on Sunday. Are these the statements that you said that she would never make, or?
No, I said that she would never say you shouldn't protest. She might say she's worried about it, but when people protested the lockdown, she said you shouldn't do this. You're endangering people.
Well, because you're literally protesting just the lockdown, right? And the idea
you're protesting for your life. You're protesting for your livelihood. People are 40% of adult black males are now unemployed.
Yeah, but there are other ways that we could theoretically alleviate this through like government stimulus or stuff, right? Or like fighting for more stimulus checks to go out or something that we can do while the lockdown.
But again, you just admitted that doesn't happen much anyways in our government, whatever side
because we fight hardcore against it, right?
Okay, so then what is the black community more endangered from?
Wait, hold on. Okay, hold on. Wait, real quick. Can you say something? What did you say that her statement was? I have to look up these statements.
The statement she gave on the protest? Sure. I don't remember verbatim, but she talked about how they were great protests and she supported them.
Hold on, I have to find the exact statements. 1 second. Wait, Brandon, what is your problem? This guy in chat is really mad because he's saying that she hasn't made like any of the statements that...
Here, I found an article. Okay, Brandon, I guess if you tell me what he said, I'll try to address it.
Hold on 1 second. Guys, for debates, when you guys say that what he's saying is wrong and you don't actually link a link, you're literally fucking stupid as fuck. You're the worst type of fucking morons in the universe of my history. Brandon, all of you guys in chat, I'm just saying, when you just type things like, oh, he's wrong, and you don't link anything, like, seriously, fuck off, like, off yourselves in a video game. Like, leave chat. Don't type at all. Like, your comments are fucking worthless to me, okay? And you are worthless as a human being. Sorry, right, I had to fix my mic. All right, wait, what are we looking for?
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry.
Somebody's saying that she never said the protesters in Michigan shouldn't protest.
Okay, I'll see what I can find. So here's her statement. I'll just read her statement from the protests here this weekend. Governor Whitmer is calling for communities to designate areas for people to peacefully protest, some turning violent. She issued a statement Saturday, May 30th, asking the public to protest peacefully, but also adhere to social distancing. The First Amendment right to protest has never been more important, and in this moment...
so what is she... So has she told people protesting the quarantine not to protest? Like, is she being hypocritical here?
Yes.
Okay, find me those statements just so that I can see it.
Sure.
But it sounds like she's literally saying here, like, you should adhere to social distancing as the coronavirus pandemic continues. Like,
right, but she's supporting protests. Here's ABC News. I'll send you the link here, and I'll read to it what she says. I apologize. I mean, I think you understand. I don't have all these quotes memorized.
Yeah, no, of course. I don't expect you to.
Michigan Governor Whitmer, who's charged with overseeing the critical background response to coronavirus, said the frequent protests overwhelming the state's capital against our stay-at-home order are undermining the effort to stem the spread of the deadly virus. These protests, they do undermine the effort, and it's very clearly a political statement that's playing out where people are coming together from across the state. They're congregating. They're not
Wait, she's literally... Okay, this is why I have to ask her quote. So she's literally saying the exact same thing about these protests as she did the other ones. Her quote, while I respect people's right to dissent, they need to do it in a way that is responsible and does not put others at risk. And then her quote about the current protests going on is, it is crucial to those who choose to demonstrate to do so peacefully in a way that follows social distancing guidelines to protect public health. So it seems like in this case, her statements are completely consistent.
These protests, in a perverse way, make it likelier that we're going to have to stay in an in-home posture. The whole point of them, supposedly, is that they don't want to be doing it. And that's why I'm asking everyone with the platform to call on people to do the right thing. These have been really political rallies where people come with Confederate flags and Nazi symbolism and call for violence. This is not appropriate in a global pandemic, but it's certainly not an exercise of democratic principles where we have free speech. This calls for violence. It's racist misogyny. So people that were protesting her, she said, oh, this is bad. You're more likely to spread the disease. Compare that to the First Amendment right to protest has never been more important. In this moment, when it's still bad.
Okay, hold on. So we've moved this goalpost like so hard. So firstly, she disagrees with these protests, but she agrees with the other one. That's fine. People can, like, I agree with some protests over certain things. I think other protests are stupid. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But she explicitly says that, like, if you're going to protest, make sure that you adhere to certain guidelines so that you don't spread COVID-19. She said that about both protests.
Right, but she called for people to not, she said, and I'm quoting, these protests in a perverse way make it likely we're going to have to stay in an in-home posture. The whole point of them is that you don't want to be going out and doing it. And that's why I'm asking everyone on the platform to call on them to do the right thing. So she says, the protests make it likelier we're going to have to stay at home. So I'm calling on people to do the right thing.
Yeah, and it seems like the reason why they're doing that is because they're not taking the appropriate measures to keep themselves safe. Like, how many times have we seen videos of people protesting the lockdown and they're not wearing masks and they're all together and shit, right?
Right, but she's not, like, she doesn't even make a comment about the riots that are going on in Michigan. On this hand, she says, oh, I saw someone with a Confederate flag. These protests are devastating us during a pandemic. In the context of the riots and the protests that are going on in Michigan, she says, oh, yes, this is a beautiful protest. This is wonderful. And we actually have people that are coming out. For example, there is a group of doctors that are coming out today. It's allegedly over 1,000 signed on to this, that are saying that as experts in the field, they think that the public health of racism is more important to fight than COVID. And so therefore we must stay locked down. This is the other one that I had. Let me see. De Blasio was asked today.
Wait, hold on. Can I find, I want to see if she's made comments about the riots or whatever. Hold on.
Sure.
So here's an article. Michigan Governor Whitmer calls on public officials to bring down the heat and urges peaceful protest.
Okay.
Hold on. To the overwhelming majority who have taken to the streets and protest peacefully, I hear you. I see you, I respect you, and I support your efforts to enact real structural change in America. When I see some of the things play out across the state as soon as it gets dark, I'm very troubled by it, because it's by and large not the peaceful demonstrators who are upset about George Floyd and all of our nation's history about police brutality. There's people with different agendas who are abusing someone else's pain in order to inflict damage on the community. Sounds like these are pretty bad statements about the rioters that she's explicitly making.
Yes, but she didn't, the context of what she said to the protests about her policies and lockdowns, she said, these are racist white supremacists. They need to do the right thing. This isn't appropriate to have this sort of protest during a pandemic. That's what she said.
Okay, hold on. So the original argument, the reason why we're talking about this is because you said that Whitmer was saying that these types of protests shouldn't occur at all, and she was talking about social distancing and whatnot, but she hasn't done the same for the current protests that are occurring. But that's not true. She said the same for both. She disagrees with the messaging behind one protest, and she agrees with the other. There's not a problem with that.
No, I said that she was saying that the protest of the people protesting her were likely to lead to deaths, the way they were handling it. She did not say that with the protest here.
She said they were likely to lead to deaths, or she said it was likely to increase the lockdown because of more people getting infected?
She's...
Like, I feel like we're kind of selectively quoting this.
These protests undermine the effort. It's very clearly a political statement that's playing out where people are coming across the state. They're congregating. They're not wearing masks. They're not standing 6 feet apart, and they go home into community. Now, did she say even the peaceful protests, they're not wearing masks, they're not standing 6 feet apart? She didn't say that, did she? She said, oh, I support these protests. Please engage in social distance. So in one, she's saying these people are undermining our health, and the other, she's saying, I support these protests. I hope they do things good.
Well, she probably called on it more explicitly on the first one because it's ironic that you would protest to end the lockdowns, but because you're doing it in an unsafe way, you're probably going to cause the lockdowns to be extended. So the comment seems more appropriate there. But even in the ones about the current protests, for the race-related stuff, she's encouraging people to adhere to safe guidelines. I mean, like, it seems like the messaging is pretty similar between both.
It seems clear to me that you see, I mean, for de Blasio today, he was asked point blank, do you think, what would you say to someone that's upset they couldn't go to church, but that it's okay to go out to these protests? And he said, I think that protesting 400 years of racial injustice is a little more important than, I can't remember the exact quote, but to that effect.
Hold on. His quote was, when you see a nation, an entire nation, simultaneously grappling with an extraordinary crisis seated in 400 years of American racism, I'm sorry, that's not the same question as the understandably grieved store owner or the devout religious person who wants to go back to services, de Blasio said.
Right.
That's a fair statement.
It's not a fair statement at all. I mean, so now what we're talking about, so after we went through the whole issue of, well, what's the protest really about? And we were like, yes, I guess selectively, it's not just about Black deaths, it's about all these other issues. So we need to protest that now during the virus, because he's saying you can't go to your work because of this virus. That's the context of the question. And he says, yes, but why do we need to protest right now? Particularly when his city is burning, right? So it's not like these are all like Million Man marches with Martin Luther King. Like, it's not that. His city's burning. And in that context, he says, yes, you can't go to work because your job's less important than these protests because it's 400 years of racism.
Sure. I mean, because the idea should be that hopefully you can go back to work in a couple weeks, and that'll still be
Why
there.
can't you protest in a couple weeks?
Because that's not how protests work. Nobody's going to say we'll be back in a few weeks, right?
But that doesn't mean the person enacting the law that could fine you, take away your license, or throw you in jail saying you can't go to work or church, that doesn't mean that person should say, well, I think these protests, COVID means that you can't go to work, but COVID doesn't mean that you can't protest.
Yeah, probably
That's
because
absurd.
Protecting people's right to protest is fundamentally more important than, like, protecting
your right to assembly? Or to the freedom of religion?
Well, nobody... Then
how does
people,
that make sense?
Well, because... protecting people's right to protest a specific event that happens, right, seems to be pretty central and important to, like, our First Amendment rights, because this protest won't be here in 2 months. That's not how any of these things work. Whereas, like, telling people that they can't assemble in large places due to a quarantine measure is something that in a month or two will go away. We can't just do these protests in 6 months or in 2 months or in 3 months. It's not going to be there, right? And this is
why? I mean,
why? Because nothing works that way. Of course not.
But why couldn't I protest 400 years of systemic racism 2 months from now?
Because usually it's inciting events that cause these things to, like, really take hold. Usually people need, like, some particular thing to happen. Like, we needed a little boy to die of AIDS before Reagan gave a fuck about it in gay communities. Usually you need, like, some inciting event to happen before people are like, okay, yeah, this is fucked up. Like, let's go. Like, usually these are what these movements are built on, right?
I mean, it seems easy to say, but if you're someone who's like, look, I own a business, I could afford to be locked down for a month, but not 2 months. And Cuomo tells you, sorry, even though you're going to lose your job, that's less important than someone's right in my city to protest one person dying.
Technically, there are other ways that we could alleviate or address those grievances. We should be doing more federal stimulus, for instance, but we're not.
Okay, but then I'll turn the argument. Technically, we could be doing more to fight racism, so the protests aren't necessary.
Well, but the problem is we're not fighting racism.
And we're not providing stimulus and stuff like you said.
Sure, and if people want to go out and protest for that, then amen for them as well. If they want to go out and be like, this is bullshit, like we can't survive because we're not getting the stimulus we need, people can go and protest that too. I think they probably will be at the ballot box next election cycle, of course.
So, in other words, I can't, for my economic viability, I can't go to work, but I can go out and protest for the government to give me money.
Yeah, because the work will... hopefully your ability to get a job, well, I guess I don't know at this point, but, like, hopefully you can get work in a month or 2 or 3, but, like, the way that these protests work, the same fire isn't going to be there in a month or 2 or 3.
I think that's tenuous at best. I think that anytime you start playing around with, well, your right to assembly could be eliminated unless it's on a particular issue, that's absurd. I think it's absolutely absurd, and it's just asking for a word you were using, draconian leadership, and it could be on the right or the left to say, okay, any protests that favor me, you're allowed out. Anyone who disagrees with me, you're not allowed to protest. You're not allowed to go to your work unless I say so, but you could go out and engage in protest against my political opposition if you want. That is not how this country is supposed to work. Like, the Bill of Rights is quite explicitly for all of us.
I mean, people can protest whatever they want. If they want to go out and protest the quarantine stuff, if they want to protest Black Lives Matter or whatever, they can do that. I mean, you should probably be safe while doing that, like Whitmer said, for both crowds. If you want to do it, go do it, but, like, be safe at least while you're doing it.
But you can't say that that's legitimate. Then clearly the argument that we need the lockdown to save lives is garbage.
Why?
Because if these...
You're saying that if people go out and protest for a week, that undoes 2 months of lockdown?
Why wouldn't it?
Because
What
getting
evidence
together
do you
in
have?
outside environments for some percentage of the population is far different than everybody carrying on for business as usual for 2 months.
The Imperial College study and most studies said that if the lockdown was going to be necessary, it would need to be a long-term lockdown. We even saw all the experts like Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci were saying, even as late as last week, the lockdown needs to continue. We saw all these experts say over and over again, if Florida lifts their lockdown, there's going to be problems. If Georgia lifts their lockdown, there's going to be problems. But now, all of a sudden, coinciding with these riots and political protests, this was the exact time that it was okay now to open the lockdown. But only if
First
you're
of all, I'm pretty
protesting,
sure
not if you
multiple
wanna go to
states
work.
have already been entering phases of starting to undo the lockdowns. I don't think that the protests
That's
on
right.
George Floyd got these states like, oh, okay, well, let's lift the lockdown now. Okay, number one.
That's
number
what New York did.
Do you think
New
they
York
did it just
City
in response to the
lockdown.
protests, or do you think this has been part of their phase 1, phase 2 plan that's been in the works for quite a while?
No. In New York City, they're still locked down, but they're giving the okay to protest.
Oh, sure, but I'm saying that like people aren't opening their states and undoing the lockdowns just because of the protests. But
What's the reason for the lockdown? Because it's medically necessary, right?
sure, okay, wait, hold on. Also, the idea that if people are locked down, protesting undoes all of that is probably just not true. One, it's not the whole percentage of the, it's probably just a small percentage of the population that's protesting. Two, transmission of diseases and everything in an outdoor environment is a lot different than people going to work every single day and interacting with different people and touching people and everything every single day in an office environment. Like, we know that these types of diseases transmit way more easily indoors than outdoors. That if you're in an
They're
office with
arresting-
5 people, you've got a much higher chance of getting the disease than going to a beach with 100 people.
They're arresting people in public parks and beaches.
Okay?
De Blasio I believe just yesterday, asked a bunch of Hasidic Jews out of a park, sent the police to get them out of a park. So he won't send the police to stop the rioters, but he'll send people to enforce social distancing.
Wait,
for
haven't
that
people
want
been
to-
sending police to stop rioters literally all over the country? What do you mean?
I mean, Cuomo admitted that this is Democrat Governor Cuomo of New York admitted that de Blasio's response was a disgrace, that he has the largest domestic police force of any city in the world, and he did not use it and let the city be overran.
Wait, so if I look up right now protests in New York City, I'm not going to see any riot police outside anywhere. I'm not going to see anybody in New York City fighting any police anywhere.
Who said that? But they're admitting that they left areas of the city they let the rioters go. So
isn't that what people do in every single riot, every single time in all of human history? You can't contain
Yes.
every single riot completely. You don't have the force for it. And oftentimes it's better to just let the rioters burn themselves out in certain areas before you come in and move them out anyway. Isn't this like super standard for dealing with riots in every part of the country throughout all of human history?
I don't recall cities allowing themselves to be overran to the extent that what I saw in the past few days. I don't recall that. I don't recall things like police precincts burning down. I don't recall that.
For the
And
Ferguson riots,
and
weren't
this-
there stuff that were like, also keep in mind, we haven't had, I don't know if we've had riots this severe since Rodney King. I mean, like, the Detroit riots
Right.
were fucking massive. Like, there were tons of things like burned down in that. I mean, I don't, like, the thing is that like if you're comparing this riot to like other riots that we've had over the past like 10 or 15 years, I don't think they've been as extreme as this.
Okay, so let's assume that's true. Why won't de Blasio accept the National Guard then? If you're saying that they were overran, there literally wasn't enough police to deal with this. Why wouldn't you accept the National Guard to help?
I mean, I don't know. Why did he say? What was his stated reason for it?
I have no idea. I didn't see a direct quote, but they asked him today, would you take the National Guard? He said no.
Maybe he doesn't feel that they need it for the riots to eventually die out in their city?
So how long do we have to leave these people riot before at the exact same time, and this is why the context is important, at the exact same time we're saying, well, we'll just leave the property destruction, the people being hit by cars, the store owners being beat, the people being shot to death, we'll leave all that go. But de Blasio on the same day is like, don't you go out to the park and walk your dog. We'll send the police for that. It's insanity.
It's
you
because
wanna
these are
talk
two
about-
totally separate things. Sending in the National Guard or sending in the police to fight rioters is going to massively escalate the conflict. This doesn't seem to be a case where the police can effectively just step in and with force take care of it. Whereas if you've got people violating social distancing or somebody cheating on their taxes, this is something where it's like, yeah, we can send in the police and deal with this because it's not going to massively escalate the conflict or cause horrible shit to happen.
So then the incentive is to riot. That's what people should have done under the lockdown, because what you're saying is,
Holy
if you try to
shit.
make pizza-
Fucking
If you
fucking A. Yes. Hold on. You almost just got like a really key part of why African Americans are riot. Because when it feels like the state doesn't listen to you and shit doesn't get done and police come in and fuck you up, sometimes, yeah, people have no other alternatives. Yeah, like, fuck it. I'm going to fucking protest or riot. Yeah, that's part of the reasons why people do riot, of course, is because the state isn't doing anything.
Do you think that that's legitimate?
In some cases, yeah, of course.
In these cases, do you think it's legitimate?
In which cases?
The riots we're seeing now.
I think that the destruction of public property and like police precincts and stuff, I think is totally justified, sure. And and you know what? If people felt the same about the lockdown, and that's your like, I disagree with the reason for it, but yeah, I mean, if you want to protest, like this is we're fucking Americans, of course. This is how we get our voice heard. It's by blowing shit up from the government or whatever. Yeah, of course.
I think that's insanity. I mean, it's just anarchy. So anyone.
Wait, I mean, like, was like the whole Revolutionary War, was that anarchy, or the Civil War, was that anarchy? I mean, this is how Americans protest, right? Is by fighting back against the government sometimes.
So the argument is that the founding fathers fighting back against leadership from another country is the same as people burning down neighborhoods.
What do you mean leadership from another country? We were British.
Right, we were separating from the country. Is that what you're saying?
But we were part of the country. We were British. Like like when Paul Revere rode around, he didn't say the Americans are coming. That's a myth. We were British at the time. Or the British are coming. Like everybody was British. Like, of course. Like,
if everyone was British, why did he say the British are coming?
He didn't. That's the myth. He never said that line. It wouldn't have made sense for him to ride around saying the British are. Yeah, I'm almost 99% sure that line was never uttered. He didn't say the British are coming because they were British. Everybody was British. It wouldn't make sense to say that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, you might be totally right. I've never heard that, but that's interesting. Nonetheless, they were fighting to leave a country to create a separate country.
Sure, of course. I'm just saying that, like, protesting the government. Okay, listen, you're a conservative, and I would bet my life right now, knife to my throat in a video game, that you've probably said at some point in time, the Second Amendment is so fucking important because we need to guarantee our right to arms to fight against a violent government oppression against us. I'm almost positive that as a conservative, you sound exactly the kind of person who made an argue like that in the past, right? So clearly, it's literally in our Constitution that fighting against the government, that was it the Declaration of Independence that said that we have not an opportunity but an obligation to fight against an unjust government or whatever? Like, I mean, like, this is pretty dug into like part of our American blood, right? Is fighting against an unjust government.
I've done hundreds of videos. I challenge you to find me doing one video where I've ever advocating political violence for any of the Bill of Rights issues that I talk about all the time.
Okay, wait, so do you think that the Second Amendment is important to fight against the government oppression?
Yes.
That's an advocation of political violence.
Yes, if you're talking about the government directly attacking you and using violence on you.
Okay, well, police are the government, and they directly attack and use violence on black people, so it seems to be about as direct as it can possibly be.
No, direct violence would have been if George Floyd defended himself. Absolutely, he had the right. I don't have the right to shoot a cop over here because states over George Floyd got killed, especially when we've already came through the argument that, yes, okay, it's not really about black men being killed. It's about other things like them not having as much economic justice. So that's worth killing. Now we could say, well, because I don't like the fact that there's a lack of economic justice that I perceive, and I believe it's for systemic racism. Now I'm justified in damaging property and killing people. This proves the original point that I was making. You're going to disagree with this, obviously, but that if we embrace this lie and we just say it's systemic racism, that's the problem with everything, it leads to the point where people say, and that justifies riots.
I mean, I don't think rioting against businesses and neighborhoods is justified, but against public institutions, sure. I never said it was okay to destroy businesses or innocent people that aren't involved. But I mean, rioting against like public institutions is like, this is like one of the most American parts about us. Like people in Europe have like a fundamental enjoyment of government. They trust the government. They want the government to do things. In America, we're the exact opposite. Like rioting against the government seems to be something that's pretty baked into who we are.
Again, Lamppost says it's not economic injustice, it's police violence. Yeah, that's not what Destiny said. You said it's right. We're agreeing it's not about police murdering a person because they're racist. You said that's not the case.
No, well, that's what these particular protests and riots are about, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that plays into it. It's like if you walk up and call a black person the N-word, the black person isn't mad because you called them the N-word. They're mad because like that's like the icing on the cake of all sorts of other systemic like things that exist in the United States that fucks with that person. There's a reason why if somebody walks up to me and calls me a cracker, I don't give a fuck because in society being white isn't necessarily like I don't deal with issues in the US because I'm white. But the problem is that like when you look at minority groups that have like a whole deluge of shit that's part of these systems that oppress them, that things happen that become tipping points. And then the response comes to things like that, but those aren't like the things in and of themselves. Like one black person getting killed by the cops, who the fuck cares? If it's just one black person that dies of the cops, shit happens like that all the time with all sorts of people. The problem is one black person getting killed by the white cops becomes the icing on the cake to the cornucopia of problems that black people have in the United States. So in a way, the protests and the riots are about protesting against this particular Black Death. That's what they're about, but they're not there because of just that one person getting killed. Does that make sense? Or
I understand what you're saying, I do, but again, it all cruxes on the point of the oppression. But we can't just look at, I thought we were in agreement, you can't just look at the data, you have to look at the underlying reasons. So, for example, if these riots are legitimate over that, what if there were riots over Michael Brown? That was a lie. Hands up, don't shoot.
Sure, there are some people that people choose that are stupid, but like Trayvon Martin, I think is a better role model. Like
how?
Zimmerman fucking hunted this dude down in a fucking neighborhood and shot and killed him. What the fuck? That was crazy as fuck.
He wasn't a police officer.
Who cares? It was still fucked.
So wait. Your argument is if cross-racial, that's the oppression. It's cross-racial deaths. That's what we're going to talk about?
No, it's not just cross-racial death. It's the, like, that plays into the larger narrative that, like, if you see a black guy wandering around a neighborhood, like, maybe we should go hunt him down. What about the, fuck, I don't even remember the guy's name. They just got driven down in a truck by the 2 or 3 white guys that shot him in the street because they thought that he was stealing something because he walked into a house under construction and then walked away. Armand? Ahmaud Arbery or whatever? Like.
Oh, Arbery, yes. Statistically, blacks are 23 times more likely to kill whites than vice versa. And even crazier than that, the numbers don't even matter because then white supremacists use this argument like, oh, blacks are hunting down whites. That's garbage. That's not what it is. Statistically, you're almost 80 to 90% most likely to be killed by someone within your own race. So the idea of cross-racial violence, we should just dispense with it that somehow that's indicative of something anyways. But if you focus on it, like in the George Zimmerman case, well, the data clearly shows that white people are killed at a higher clip from black people than vice versa. And by the way, Zimmerman wasn't, I believe he identified as Hispanic. But again, because the people in power want to use blacks as pawns, they said, oh, no, this is a narrative of a white killing a black person.
I don't think it was the matter of who killed the black person. It was just the idea that a black kid running around through a neighborhood could be extrajudiciously hunted down and murdered by a guy who felt like he was protecting his community, whether the guy was Hispanic or Asian or white or whatever.
So if the data shows the opposite, then do you think white people have a legitimate grievance that they're killed more by blacks?
I don't know. It would depend on how those killings are part of. Like, is this like a part of like gang violence or whatever? Like, I don't think anybody here is going to defend, or I mean, some liberals get baited into it. It's stupid. Gang violence is shit and it happens, but I don't have as many tears for like fucking gang people shooting each other back and forth. Like people say 300 mass shootings a year happen and like 100 or 200 of those are like gang violence, whatever. That's shit. It shouldn't happen. It sucks, but like, that's not my problem. And I would feel it's probably not the problem of most African Americans. The problem is that like as a black person, you could walk into a neighborhood and have the cops called on you just because you're fucking black. Like that doesn't seem to be the case for white people. Like I feel pretty safe walking around like any area. I don't think if a cop comes up to me, I'm going to have a problem. Like I could find a cop and ask him for directions. I could still carry around cops and I could feel safe. When a cop comes up to my car, because I think that you're flagged if you have a CCW, a concealed carry weapon permit, you're flagged in their system. Like and I say, hey cop, just let you know, I got a gun in my car. Like, is that chill? The guy's like, cool. Half the time they don't even ask me to take it out of my fucking car. Like I feel pretty chill. I feel like if I was black, I don't think I would ever fucking carry. Because I feel like if I say that to a cop, I'm going to get fucking Philip Castile or whatever, and I'm just gonna get executed on the spot. Like I think that's the problem. Regardless of the stats saying like maybe black people kill more white people, whatever, which I could believe just because black people commit more violent crime than white people. It's just the idea of like what is your place in society and how do people treat you in different areas that the problem is. Like and again like. I could be wrong. Maybe you have stats for this. It doesn't seem to be the case that a white person walking around somewhere is going to be hunted down or extrajudiciously murdered by somebody because they're worried because they look like they fit the description of a criminal or something. That doesn't seem to be the case.
That's a difficult category to put statistics on. I don't know how you would categorize, the type.
Sure, and I hate to pull out a fucking Count Dankula argument here because it is shit. I understand that because going by videos is bad, but god damn, dude, like a black professor, was it a Harvard professor even, that had the cops called on him because he was outside his own fucking house? Like, damn, that's some fucking crazy shit. Like, does that happen to white people? Does it?
I don't see how this is any different than white people that want to go, oh, the knockout game. You see the knockout game? You can't be white and walk in certain communities or black people will just attack you. Like, is that argument, to me, it's as irrelevant to the acceptance of rioting as the argument, well, some black professor got stopped. That's heinous. I agree. But at the same time, so we've admitted that the data shows that if you're unarmed black, you're less likely to be shot, but within the statistical margin of error than white. We admit that blacks kill whites far more. And by the way, someone did make a correct argument in the chat that they said, well, yeah, but there's more whites to kill than blacks. Yes, but there's also more whites to kill people, right? There's more whites to be victims, but there's also more whites to be murdered. So it goes both ways. But anyways, these seem like very tenuous arguments to say, oh, and these riots are legitimate. If the argument was, if data backed up the fact that, you know, there are disproportionately cops hunting and killing unarmed black men, maybe the riots make sense. Maybe you're then like, okay, they fear that their lives are in jeopardy. And the reason they do fear that gets back to my original point. It's because this narrative is being pushed by people in the establishment that want to cause racial division. It's the same reason that, you know, Antifa type people are using this as an excuse to burn down these black neighborhoods right now. And you have actual legitimate black protesters saying, get the hell out of here. What are you doing? It's the exact same thing. People are using that community. And I find it outrageous. I think that it's terrible and that these communities are suffering. You know, the people suffering the most right now are the people that have lost loved ones that have been directly beaten by, you know, people, obviously. And then the people that have lost businesses over it. But other than that, it's the black community it's their towns being burnt down.
Yeah, of course, but there are other black people that are fighting against that don't want to see that happening, of course, that don't support like their own towns being burned down.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I think the way that we go about combating this is first off, we say, even if I disagree with you, obviously, we're willing to listen to you, which is, you know, I'm happy to do this show. I think I listened to you a long time before I did this show. I think one of my favorite things about you is you'll debate anyone. So that's why I really like coming on here. But that's the argument. Like, we could sit here and yell at each other and disagree, but, you know, we're not going to engage in violence. It's good to have these disagreements. So even if we disagree, we think that you have a right to be heard and we should hear you. But we have to be honest about what the problem is and not allow these riots to be co-opted and by people that want to encourage these riots, or I don't think that necessarily it's encouraging riots, but they want to create racial division. Because as long as there's racial division, then we're not focusing on things like, should we be bombing countries at the rate we are? Should we have, should we be allowing wealth disparity in the way we are? Because we have this fake narrative of, oh, well, we need to riot because police are killing unarmed black men. They're hunting them down for racial reasons. We can never get to the real problems as long as we're focused on the lie. And that's why I think that we need to address this lie. And it's going to be really difficult because there are a lot of people that's a core tenet of their life, that blacks are being hunted and killed, unarmed blacks, by racist cops, and that the whole law enforcement agency systemically racism and treats, you know, black people like victims to be killed. That's not the truth. The data doesn't back that up. Or the idea that white people are, this country is systemically racist towards black people and white people are massively racist and killing black people. That's not true. The data doesn't back that up.
Okay, I guess we'll find out what, like, I mean, I don't disagree with you that, like, the singular problem isn't cops killing black people. It's not like this singular problem. But, like, this is what sucks about racism and sexism today in America, right? We solved most of the easy racism, sexism in America has been solved. We typically don't have communities of people hanging black people off trees. Women are allowed to vote. People don't stand outside places of businesses saying Mexicans or Irish need not apply. Like, most of the easy racism and sexism stuff in the U.S. and most of the Western world has more or less been solved. Now a lot of it is a lot harder to see and a lot more subtle and a lot more cumulative on its effects on people. It might be that black people are more likely to be born to single-parent households. It might be that black people might subconsciously be discriminated against when it comes to job hirings because of their last name. It might be like all of these little tiny itty-bitty things add up, and it's really hard to get somebody, like, you just can't start a protest with black people are 15% less likely to be hired based on having stereotypical black names. Like, nobody's going to go out and fucking march for that. So it makes more sense that people rally behind, like, a big killing like this, even if, like, that killing isn't necessarily the sole reason, or even if that issue, police killing black people, isn't the sole reason why people ought to be out and rioting. It's more like this is just the inciting event to a culmination of issues that are impacting black people disproportionately that causes them to get out in the streets and riot. So hopefully, the goal is that hopefully we see some kind of reform after this that starts to move us in a direction where some of these grievances are being addressed. I mean, it comes down to whether or not people actually show up to the polls and vote, but I mean, that's what we have to wait and see.
I mean, I don't think that rioting based on kind of a false narrative that we see a lot of people, the reason they're rioting is, I don't think it's bringing people together. I think, for example, you saw universal condemnation of this cop. Now there are a lot of people that are like, well, yeah, I still have condemnation of this cop, but look at what's going on in these communities, the riots and stuff like that. Now I want no part of it. The same was true in the Ferguson situation and things like that. To me, it seemed like under Obama, there was kind of, at the beginning of Obama's tenure, there seemed to be a mass agreement, at least maybe it's just the circles I was hanging in, about police brutality, the need to reform, you know, the blue code of silence and things like that. By the way, I don't think all cops are racist or anything like that or violent.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? And now it seems like it couldn't be further away.
I mean, like, I mean, like, you say that, and maybe that's true, but Martin Luther King talked a lot about nonviolence and peaceful protests, and he did it a fuck ton. And then he got fucking murdered in the April of 1968, and then people were like, fuck this shit, we're rioting. And then after that, we got, no, fuck, shit, I've got my timeline for this. It wasn't after Martin Luther King's death, but it was like the riots that broke out that eventually caused the Civil Rights Act to get passed, right? Like, it seemed like it wasn't happening in just a response to the peaceful protests. It seemed like it was a response to, like, the actual race riots that were breaking out in the United States. I think Martin Luther King got assassinated after his 68 versus 64.
So basically you said it's over economic stuff, and it's over, like, the fact that, like, a black professor, not that specific situation, but that idea that you could be someone and you're pulled over by the police. That's worth all of these riots? That's what we need. Oh, well, in order to solve that, we need to have these riots, which predictably is driving a wedge between people as this type of extremism happens. You know who's really happy right now? Richard Spencer. I'm sure he's gleeful right now, and a bunch of, you know, scumbag racists are going, oh, see what's going on in the black community?
Well, yeah, but, like, what if we get similar changes after these riots as we did as the ones that led to the Civil Rights Act? Like,
well, then the lesson's going to be learned. The incentive will be learned. Okay, well, then if you have perceived political non-power, the key to winning it back is rioting.
Sure,
and
that's the kind of pressure that you need, right? I feel like, dude, I grew up listening to Glenn Beck so much. I have all of these hardcore Republican things that are still instilled with me. The idea that, like, public officials should be scared that you're going to riot against them. Like, what it means to be an American is that your president, your governor, your mayor is constantly worried that the people are going to rise up and toss their ass out of office if they don't respond to the will of their constituents. Like, shouldn't that be the case?
I mean, is that what's happening? Is that what you think? Maybe if this was a dedicated movement that said we're just attacking this police precinct, I think that the actual state buildings that have been burned down are far, 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 far less than the private businesses, than actual shop owners have been beaten, that people have been shot, police officers being ran over by cars. I mean, none of this is the form of legitimate rioting or protesting that you're referencing that the founding fathers would have been for, if necessary, using threats to take back the government. I don't see how beating some shop owner is accomplishing that.
No, I'm not defending those riots. I'm not saying that.
I'm not saying you're defending that, but we know you're defending the riot, and you know that that's the majority of the riot.
I don't think the majority of the riot. There are tons. I don't know what the numbers are going to pan out to right now, but there are plenty of peaceful protests occurring around the United States as well.
But that's not. I'm not talking about the protests. We can agree peaceful protests are great. You said the riots were legitimate.
I said that rioting against public institutions is legitimate. If you want to burn down a police precinct, or like a cop car, flip a cop car, or whatever, that type of stuff is defensible. But attacking, like, other businesses and other people is not acceptable.
Okay, but we can see the majority of the buildings being attacked.
I don't know if we know that right now. I don't know if we know the majority of rioting has been against businesses or not. It's possible that it could be.
Okay,
but
how about a large portion? Would that
too much of it is, sure. I agree, of course.
And so, like, why would we, like, it just seems, and again, what are we talking about here? Maybe this would be acceptable if we were talking about the actual truth was that unarmed blacks were being killed by police in the manner that I was speaking of. But when we're talking about, well, actually, it's more about economic justice and stuff. And then the inverse argument's true of COVID. Well, no, we had to shut people's jobs down and we had to destroy the economy over a fear.
Okay,
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think. I mean, I think we're kind of looping. I feel like I'm on mushrooms.
Yeah, maybe time to end. But just if you don't mind, my name's Rob Noor. I got a YouTube show, Normal America with Rob Noor. You guys will probably all hate, but that's okay. Appreciate you all anyways. And regardless if we agree or not, I do really appreciate you having me on to talk. And I think that if we had more conversations like this, you know, maybe it would mean rioting would be less necessary. So.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on if legislation gets passed, right? But
Literally live right around the
I mean, we'll
exact
see.
center between the
I
spot
just
where
I
Floyd
don't see
died
how this is going to lead to political.
and the
I mean,
spot
I
where
think as a
3rd
pure
precinct
political
was.
move,
I
I
have
don't know
some
that this is a
opinions if you
win
would like
for
to.
the type of people that these riders would want to be elected.
well, like,
For example, Bernie Sanders might have been like someone that they may have liked. I think this will hurt a candidate like Bernie.
Do you think that we're going to see some sort of response to what's happening? Do you think we're going to see some sort of legislative response?
I think that we'll see some lip service paid. It'll be like, oh, we started a commission that will look at police.
Do you think that this type of stuff is going to help or hurt Trump in his election?
I think the riots will help Trump.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out what the public polling and everything turns out. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know though. And I can tell you right now that factors 0 into my calculus. Like I'm more.
Well, no, I mean that's really important. If stuff like this and Trump's response ends up making him less likely to get elected, I assume most of the people protesting or rioting even would assume that that's like a victory on their part.
I mean, that's outrageous, though. If you're rioting for that kind of political reason, that's even worse.
I mean, when top down, when the only responses Trump has given is that when the looting starts, the shooting starts, or like quoting literally like racist.
That's what happened.
He's literally quoting like a racist cop from '68, I think. Like that's not a good look. Like that's not a good way to manage your citizens protesting. Like when you're literally tear gassing people out so you can do a shitty photo op in some cemetery or church or whatever, that St. John's Place or whatever. Like these are really bad looks for how Trump is handling things, and I'm sure a lot of people will be happy with literally anybody else at the helm but him.
I mean, I think that what you're saying gets to a truth of what a lot of people are thinking on the left, which they actually like these riots. And I think that this could be a reason. This is the conspiratorial nature in me, but this could be why people like de Blasio are like, yeah, go ahead, keep rioting. We're just going to give up parts of the city and be unwilling to accept the National Guard.
Well, I don't think there's conspiratorial at all. I think that affecting political change like this is fine. Like that's part of the goal. Like activism and riots are one side of the coin, and the other side is voting. Like bringing awareness to issues like this, in an attempt to get people to vote differently is part of the goal, right?
If we're looking at it in a political calculus and you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, I will be happy to have that soundbite that you're admitting that de Blasio is allowing his city to burn because he thinks.
I don't know how much de Blasio is allowing a city to burn, but I'm pretty sure riots are being allowed to burn to some extent in every major city because you can't just send in the cops and the National Guards to destroy everybody and get everything. You have to let people like burn themselves out a little, right?
I just think that's outrageous. I think it's outrageous. Would you say the same thing about the Charlottesville protesters? Should they have been allowed to just burn themselves out instead of leading to a confrontation that actually resulted in some scumbag murdering someone? Of course not. They said
my understanding is that this is how every single major riot plays out. That nobody has a big riot and they send in the police and they just like crush it immediately. Like I'm pretty sure the Charlottesville protests were allowed to carry out. Like,
so what's the amount of days that it would go before you'd say, okay, well, maybe it's time.
I don't know, man. A few days. I mean, it seems like we're hitting the limit now, where like people should probably like fuck off. Like it seems like.
Well, I mean, last night was pretty damn bad. That was what, day 5.
Sure. Maybe people feel like they need to keep going until like an actual concrete concession is made. Then I don't know. Maybe that's the goal. Like.
But what's the concession? Like when you start. The
concession might be the firing of certain police chiefs. The concession might be the passage of some legislation that makes a third-party arbitration. I think, didn't Obama have an initiative that he launched under the DOJ that would have given more third-party oversight to cops that Trump disbanded? Maybe something like that coming up again, or maybe a changing in the rules and how police conflict is dealt with when innocent people or when other people get murdered by cops. Like I don't know. Like there's a number of concessions that I'm sure people would like to be made.
But look, if we're going to make the political point, well, Trump got rid of this concession. Also, a lot of leaders in the black community were adamant that they wanted prison reform under Obama, who wouldn't give it to them, and Trump did that. So
the type of prison reform that people wanted, the type of prison reform that made it so we got rid of nonviolent drug offenders, or got rid of like, what do you mean? Like,
yes, that's what Trump's prison reform did. Was it perfect? Did it get rid of all nonviolent? No, but it was a damn step better than what was done under the previous administration, and leaders in the black community agreed. They might say, well, it wasn't just Trump, blah, 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 but Trump's the one who signed the legislation, and by and large, leaders in the black community enjoyed that. So, I mean, I don't understand. Like, again, this has to do with this false narrative being pushed, where it's like, oh, we just assume it's about race. Like, Trump's a racist Nazi. Trump's out there telling cops to kill people. That's not what's going on. That's the data.
Trump's rhetoric has been absolutely inflammatory during this whole thing.
I don't have to answer it. It's fine. I mean, it's inflammatory in the sense he came out immediately and he said that he thought the death was outrageous and that his DOJ would be investigating. And then he said, if you loot, like, we're not going to deal with these rioters. We're not going to let you riot. That's
Trump
not,
is like literally like on the phone telling people that if you find people protesting at night, you should put them in jail for 5 years. And he's asking people to make burning the flag illegal. Like,
I mean, if he said that, that's outrageous. I haven't seen him say burning, like that people should go to jail for 5 years for protesting.
I'm sorry, it might have been 10
I'll
years.
leave
CNN leaked, apparently one of the governors recorded a call with him yesterday. You can hear him saying that, like, these protesters need to be thrown in jail for, like, 10 years or whatever. And then later on in the call, he talks about how we need to make burning the flag illegal again. Like, people will probably be on board with it now. Like,
So then would that be Trump's rhetoric causing that, or would it be the Democrats released that to inflame racial tensions? Like if that was a private
wait, what? Wait. If I were to walk down the street and I were to call like 100 black people the N-word and shoot and kill half of them, and somebody releases that to the public, and then I go, well, who's actually causing the problem here? Is it me that's being racist and killing black people, or is it you that's telling everybody I'm doing it? What?
Well, first, it wasn't a racial issue. Apparently you're saying he said, I haven't even seen this.
No, I'm not saying it's a race issue. I'm just saying that for him to complain that getting leaked was the problem and not him saying it is quite a jump. Like,
all right, man. I guess I gotta run.
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
The phone call must be important, but I do really appreciate it. I really do. And yeah, I hope that everything's well with you and you continue well. Hopefully I could talk to you again.
Yep.
Thanks for everyone who listened as well.
Okay, have fun. Be careful, man.
All right, you too.